What's up, Crusher Crew? Welcome back. I've got a great episode lined up for you tonight. Jesse Michels on his podcast just dropped an absolute bombshell that focuses entirely for about 3 hours on the life of Andrei Puharich.
The pilot says he'll be ready soon, John.
And last, our forever optimistic, Dr. Andrei Puharich, who wrote the astounding book, The Sacred Mushroom. Dr. Puharich's book brought us here in the first place.
Andrei Puharich is such a mysterious figure, and he is woven throughout the history and the story that involves everything from the Montauk Project, MK Ultra, psionic processes or psionic contact, and the ability to connect with telepathy to higher dimensional beings. And it is such a strange story that I feel like I have a lot of the pieces of the puzzle that sort of got skimmed over in his interview and his presentation about Andrei Puharich. Andrei Puharich is a pivotal figure who is connected to the entire operation at the Stanford Research Institute with remote viewing, and where they claim that they discovered it through Hal Puthoff and his research at Stanford Research Institute. But right there in the shadows and paving the way was Andrei Puharich the entire time. This also connects into the conversations around metamaterials, or pieces of crashed UFOs that have been smuggled out into research at the To the Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge. And a lot of the work and the reports that we hear going on today, a lot of what we know about psionic operations and psionic contact, the idea of using people with telepathic abilities to communicate with UFOs, including the UFO capture program, has a long, deep, and even a dark history to the whole story. So I want to go through the Jesse Michels interview and his whole entire presentation about Andrei Puharich, and we're going to go through a lot of the aspects of his interview and video, and we're going to deepen the rabbit hole and go all the way down as far as we can go with more of the historical context of how this all fits together.
There is a connection between the paranormal, UFOs, and the myths of ancient history. The clues are scattered across the landscape from a forbidden past, maybe even in your own backyard. There is a connection between the true nature of our reality, consciousness, and the unexplained. I'm Carl the Crusher. Let's explore the unknown.
I want to say right up front that I am not the type of person that typically likes to just watch content where somebody else is watching the work that another content creator has done and basically stealing their content and trying to make it their own. That is not my intentions in this video. And so what I've done as a part of this is, if you look down in the description box below, all of the sponsorships that Jesse Michels has, I'm going to share his links to his sponsors and promote his content and sponsorships, as well as provide a link over to go watch the full interview, because we're not going to go through all of it today. I'm not going to be taking all of the length of the interview that he did on his channel. It's like 3 hours long. I'm just going to focus on some of the highlights, and then I'm going to try to add a lot of value and depth to continue that story. So those are my intentions. Let's get into it.
I'm here with Greg Malazzi. This has been a long time coming. We've had a lot of interesting offline conversations. You made an amazing documentary called Mind Traveler about this very mysterious mid-century scientist named Andrei Puharich, who is like this Zelig of American conspiracies. He's this architect of MK Ultra and early CIA mind control techniques, but also seems to be channeling aliens through what he calls the space kids, this like collection of kids who he recruits who are psychic. He's the inspiration for Star Trek, incidentally. Like, he is one of the most interesting people I've ever encountered. And you've made this amazing documentary on him. So I just can't wait to dive into this. And I appreciate you being here.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So give me a little bit about the origin story for Andrei Puharich. Who is he, and how did he come to be one of these kind of renegade spooky scientists involved in mind control?
I guess you could start it at Northwestern University. He went there. He was a medical student. I think he started in 47. And so he was there doing all sorts of stuff with the nervous system. He was very interested in that, and he was doing like normal medical training. And he was actually part of the Army Specialized Training Program. Have you heard of this?
No.
It's this special program where basically they recruit students who they believe could be, useful um, to whatever they're planning on doing in certain categories of the Army, whether it be medical, so forth. He was a medical doctor, and he was part of this program. It's very strange. Kissinger was part of this program.
Really?
A bunch of other weird people. Kurt Vonnegut, the author.
What?
Yeah, you could look it up. It's really weird. So he was part of that. Basically, it was like sort of a recruiting program, and they saw something in him all the way back in 47 when he was a medical student. And he very rarely, in fact, I've never even heard him mention this in all the stuff I've listened to and read about him. So for whatever reason, he didn't talk about it, and that could have been his first, step into that world, the military world. But that happened when he was a medical student, like way before the Roundtable Foundation, the first lab he had, or anything like that. So
What did this military program, this Army program involve?
you can, even on Wikipedia, there's not much about it, but I think it was more like looking at certain institutions, certain places for people who are special. I mean, Army specialized training, and he was considered special at that time for what he was doing, and they just saw something in him, and he was brought into that program. I don't know what it did exactly, or what, like, the day-to-day or anything, but he was part of it, as well as, like, again, a list of other people, like in all areas, right? Again, Kurt Vonnegut, the author, like all these people
It's crazy.
were a part of that.
Where was he a medical student?
Northwestern
Okay.
Chicago, which is a very prestigious school.
Absolutely. Evanston. And I think also Jalen Hynek was,
did, yeah.
as astronomer Blue Book was Northwestern too. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's in the Chicago suburbs and he's a medical student. How does he get into like telepathy and mind control and things like that?
I came up with a theory of the nervous system that I called the Puharich theory. I visualized the nervous system as being embedded in the cell tissue of the body, just as the roots of a tree are embedded in the ground, which gives it nourishment. But the tree also has a similar network radiating into the sky. Perhaps man does as well, and he too gains nourishment through a touchless process. And if dynamics can be transferred, why can't thoughts?
So he was, a medical student, and there's a guy also at Northwestern at the time named Warren S. McCullough. Do you know who that is?
No, who's that?
You could do an episode on him. He's like, a Puharich on steroids, sort of, back then at least. But he was this very far out researcher into basically ESP stuff back then. He was very interested in, like, altering drugs, psychedelic drugs, mind altering stuff.
For the audience, ESP is extrasensory perception.
Yes. Yeah. Extrasensory perception. So he was at Northwestern, this guy McCullough. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But he sort of took Puharich under his wing, and from what I understand, was the first person who introduced him to, whatever weird science, if you want to call it that, because he was one of these guys, McCullough, who would, on his off time do all these like strange experiments with radio frequencies and that kind of stuff. And I think, like, in the academic setting, he had to, put on a suit and tie and, like, not talk about that, basically. But he also was very involved in intelligence stuff. Like, he was always getting sort of, like, we have letters from, like, CIA and stuff back then, who were kind of going to him with questions and so forth.
McCullough.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And he actually, there was an archive in, I think it wasn't Northwestern, it was some bizarre archive I found years ago making the film. And, I know you had Annie Jacobson on, like she's in the film, and she was trying to find records on McCullough because, he's really interesting. He was part of the Puharich story. And somehow we found this like big stash of archives of his that, again, were these letters from CIA and the Navy and everything, sort of, I guess, wanting to recruit him. But in those letters, there were letters from McCullough back to these agencies saying, you should check this guy Puharich out. I work with him. He's young. He's very smart. And he was older, like much older than Puharich at that time. I think he was probably like, in his 70s or 80s or something. So, he passed on. But basically that, I think, triggered Puharich to get very interested in the subject. So he became almost like obsessed with it. And he sort of had this moment back then where he's like, I'm either going to choose the traditional academic path or I'm going to choose the, path of ESP, telepathy. And he talks very openly about like making that choice.
I was unexpectedly put in contact with Henry A. Wallace, vice president under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was impressed by my quest for the existence of telepathy and granted me a large sum of money. Additional benefactors emerged, including the heirs to two of the wealthiest families in the world, the Astors and the DuPonts.
I was able to get a barn. I started working in the dead of winter in 48 in Maine. We lived in a big 50-room house.
Okay, so we got to stop here because they actually skip over quite a bit of the history here. Before the property in Maine, one of the main things that Andrei Puharich did was he went down to Mexico and he was conducting psionic research or telepathic research involving psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms, and the practices of indigenous shaman people who lived down in remote parts of Mexico. He was going down and talking to these shamans, interviewing them, and had translators with him. And he was trying to understand the relationship between what they saw in their local customs and their practices, in their shamanic practices, the way that they saw the universe and consciousness and reality. But he was also analyzing the substances that they were using, like ayahuasca, magic mushrooms, and other psychedelic substances as a means to enhance telepathic abilities. And there was this movement or a shift back in the time where in MK Ultra with Sid Gottlieb, the primary focus of MK Ultra involved a lot of psychedelic substances. They used LSD and other substances in order to try and induce people and people that they were exploiting into altered states of consciousness in order to manipulate them as a form of mind control. Basically, putting them in this altered state of consciousness and making them highly suggestible. They were looking for essentially for like a truth serum where they could take people and during interrogations, they could either extract information from them or even plant false ideas and create sort of what they call a Manchurian candidate, where they could later trigger a response from these individuals and get them to carry out acts, perform assassinations, to do all kinds of different stuff. And they could sort of use these substances in order to control their behavior. So they would be able to like call them on the phone, say a certain hypnotic message to these individuals, and that would trigger a subconscious thought inside their mind that would get them to carry out an act like they were remote controlling a person, essentially like a drone. And if you go back and watch the early documentaries, there is an actual documentary filmed about Andrei Puharich exploring the magic mushroom and these indigenous cultures. And if you watch long enough in the video, he actually conducts psychic and telepathic experiments with the host of the documentary, where he gives him magic mushrooms and then does these telepathy games with him using a deck of playing cards to try and match the numbers and the suit of the cards. And then there's even an element where you see technology get deployed, where he sets up like a strobe light right in front of the guy's face. So he's under the influence of psilocybin mushrooms. He's experiencing this euphoria and this altered state of consciousness. And then he puts him in front of this strobe light that pulses in front of his face while Andrei Puharich is sort of doing a guided meditation and talking him through the process. And then they test his telepathic abilities and they discover that he's able to guess the cards effectively.
And distant journey. We're in Mexico, thousands of miles from our Hollywood sound stages in a place called Mitla, on the very edge of civilization. There are no actors, there's no script. For this psychic report can only be recorded at the moment it happens. Here in the plaza of the kings of Zapotec, here in the antiquity of Mexico, we begin a search whose ending, at this very moment of filming, we do not know. We are searching for something far older than these ruins, which, if found, could hurtle ordinary man infinitely beyond his five senses. And now the first step beyond. The first step is a faltering one. We wait day after day for perfect flying weather, for the only way to reach our goal, the inaccessible village of Juquila, is by light plane over trackless mountains. Has he come back yet?
No.
Well, keep your fingers crossed. This lovely hacienda at the foot of the Dombach Mountains has been here a little longer than we have, but not much. From here, weather permitting, our chartered plane will fly us to a remote mountain village to look for, of all things, a mushroom. But a very strange mushroom indeed, with powers beyond belief. And here are the mushroom hunters, as improbable a group as you will find anywhere. For instance, this is Dr. Barbara Braun, brilliant neuropharmacologist of the University of California at Los Angeles. With her is David Gray, one of the last kahunas of Hawaii, a spiritual leader whose line goes back 900 years and whose quest for knowledge beyond the world of materialism has led him everywhere in the world. And now here, and here, with friend, is Jeffrey Smith, a distinguished professor of philosophy and humanities at Stanford University. And now, and mighty important, is our translator, William Upson, a missionary who has lived among the people of our remote village for the last 9 years, and the only man in the world who speaks their language.
The pilot says he'll be ready soon, John.
And last, our forever optimistic, Dr. Andrei Puharich, who wrote the astounding book, The Sacred Mushroom. Dr. Puharich's book brought us here in the first place, and in it, he explains how the mushroom seems to have an incredible effect on the power of extrasensory perception.
Incredible is the word. We're here for some very specific purposes. We want to know why these people here in Mexico have kept this right so secret for so many centuries. But I would say that our prime mission is to explore and examine the biochemicals present in these new mushrooms and find out if they can be of any benefit in this problem of mental disease.
What Dr. Puharich hasn't told you, it is not all as simple as it sounds. The last time he was here, looking for the mushroom, a man was shot.
And shot at.
And another man was driven out of his mind.
For a while.
Thanks to the help of the sick child's mother, secret arrangements are made, and we are guided to this hidden place to wait. But it is almost midnight before the brujo appears. He has practiced the secret and all but forbidden rites of the sacred mushroom for decades. Rites passed on from father to son for perhaps 4,000 years. But of course he has never performed before such an audience or a camera. Our scientists have prepared test questions to evaluate the brujo's extrasensory perception. But he insists on one condition. To achieve spiritual union, they also must eat the mushroom. However, in the interest of detached scientific observation, he agrees that Dr. Braun does not have to take the mushroom. The rites begin. a strangely aromatic root is burned. Inhaled. The brujo murmurs incantations in Chitina, a language unknown anywhere else on this earth. As our group waits for the mushroom to take effect, Bill Upson questions the brujo. Because of the circumstances, the sound is, of course, far from perfect.
I just asked him when we would see something, when something would happen. And he held up his hand to indicate that he didn't want to talk at this particular time.
And then silence again as we wait. And then, oddly enough, the first sound we hear as the chemical in the mushroom takes effect is laughter. The brujo has just told of an amusing moment from Bill's childhood in Indiana. Indiana, a place the brujo does not even know exists. Now, each of the group tests the extrasensory powers of the brujo. Sometimes he is accurate, sometimes he is not.
Well, to brighten the eyes. The whole rabbit will brighten the eyes. What? Oh, it's perfect. This means clairvoyance, right? Clairvoyance.
The following is one moment when he is startlingly correct. Suddenly he turns to Dr. Braun, whom of course he has never seen or heard of before.
Very good. No, but I have to eat it. To eat my butt. You're still sick. You're sick in the chest. Your heart. Your heart is sick. Can you ask more specific? No, let's try to get it pinpointed. Heart rate slow.
Without a moment's hesitation, he accurately diagnosed a personal illness that only Dr. Braun knows about.
Now we'll lie you down on the bed.
What for?
We'll do some physical testing before the effects of the mushroom take hold.
Like what? I mean, like what effects?
You'll find out. Well, it's been about 20 minutes since you had the mushroom, John. How do you feel?
Fine. I feel, strong. Sort of, you know, it's kind of hard to... strong, a sense of, kind of a sense of well-being. Is that,
Yes, some people feel that way. Let's try something. I want you to stand right up here in front of this light. Yes, close your eyes and tell me what you see. Lower your head a little bit. A little more. Now.
Oh, I see it. Now I see it. I see so many things I can't tell you. Can't you slow it?
Slow it.
Now I see, but I see so many colors that are... go...
Are they pretty?
In geometric signs, now it's like great things. They're magnificent, is what they are. They're magnificent. I have never been so aware of color. It makes me quite dizzy. I feel like I would like to dive into the middle of it.
Well, we'll try the card test again.
Now.
All right, same way. Start with your left hand and try to find the one in this row.
Distinct impression of like the dunes of a desert or like half hoops on that way behind the other.
That's pretty close, John. Want to try another one?
Please. It has a great deal of, it has something, power, like noise. I don't know how to translate that into a picture. It seems to have that noise and speed. It's like there's a face looking this way and another face is looking up that way.
That's pretty good. Would you like to take a look and see what it's like?
Andrei Puharich was essentially the individual that shifted the movement of MK Ultra from psychedelic substances over to directed energy, or into using frequencies and radio frequencies in the electromagnetic field itself in order to manipulate people's thoughts and their actions, and to do essentially mind control. As a weird supernatural layer to this, along with that, they claimed that they discovered that when they started to mess with the electromagnetic field in order to influence the brain, that they were able to open up consciousness in order to communicate with interdimensional beings, or higher beings, or aliens, so to speak. And they started receiving messages from the beyond. And so it was kind of a mixed bag. And all of this happened before he even got the property in Maine and started doing experiments with these star camps for kids. It's really fascinating stuff.
Having residents and so on. It was called the Roundtable Foundation.
And so he opens the Roundtable Foundation. So there's a lot going on with how that even opened, because it's a huge lab. It's like a massive barn. It's on the coast of Maine, Rockland, Maine, it's called. So, it's this huge place. He's got like a staff, all. And the thing with Puharich, I learned, like, he tells a different story of how the Roundtable started and how we got the money and everything to what we kind of figured out was really going on.
What'd you figure out?
Well, it was all, government funded at that time.
Who it was the CIA or
everyone, Army, Navy, CIA, something called the something Armor Foundation that was somehow tied into the Army, but basically any of those places back then. I mean, we have letters of all of them. You get Army, you name it. I mean, they were just like flocking to this place, basically giving him money to do research. And this was 49, 50, very early.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And you think their preliminary interest was mind control, telepathy, anything beyond the purview of kind of normal materialist reductionist physics that might be able to be weaponized or confer a tactical advantage to the United States? Or
it's complex, but yes, the short answer is yes. But I think obviously there was an interest in ESP and in what he was doing, and in this idea of, okay, what if this is real? I mean, he speaks a lot, and we uncovered like hundreds of tape recordings of his that no one's ever heard. And so, he talks a lot about, like, they were just obsessed at that time with, like, what if this were real? What are the implications? What if somebody could basically remote view? I mean, he was doing remote viewing, and this is something, like, I don't think is really out there, like, way before SRI 70s, like, we're talking early 50s.
Whoa.
He's basically doing what would be considered remote viewing.
Do you think Hal Puthoff was aware of Puharich's kind of foundation that he set with remote viewing? Because the story is that, official American remote viewing kind of started with Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ and Stanford Research Institute.
I'm not trying to make bold statements. That's not, true. If you're looking at it from a, like, research, when did this start? Because we have, like, all of the Roundtable research, which is so much. I mean, even all the time we spent on the film, I still haven't looked at it all, but they basically detail the experiments going on, which were, your classic ESP stuff, like the cards,
Yep.
all that. But no, they were doing like what would exactly the definition of like remote viewing. And so, yeah, I think the intelligence community, so forth, were just very intrigued with what was going on there.
So it's a combination of kind of, these military factions and then these kind of blue-blooded elites.
Yeah.
Sort of.
So he kind of answered the question there as though whether or not Hal Puthoff was aware of the background of Andrei Puharich. And he answers the question more in the sense that Andrei Puharich was clearly involved in exploring aspects of remote viewing and ESP before the Stanford Research Institute with Hal Puthoff even existed. But I want to insert a little bit of knowledge here and history to put it more in context, where I believe that it's absolutely directly connected. And the way that it's connected between Andrei Puharich and Hal Puthoff at the Stanford Research Institute is through Yuri Geller. Andrei Puharich actually was the one that met Yuri Geller when he was just like 21 years old and recruited him into these ESP and remote viewing studies before the Stanford Research Institute ever existed. And when the Stanford Research Institute started off with Dr. Hal Puthoff, their primary subject and the person that they tested the most was Yuri Geller. He was the first one that was in there. And I think it is highly unlikely that Andrei Puharich and Hal Puthoff didn't have some kind of a secret and direct connection.
Is Jeffrey Smith, a distinguished professor of philosophy and humanities at Stanford University. And now, and last, our forever optimistic Dr. Andrei Puharich.
So finally he agreed to meet me the next morning at the apartment of a friend of mine. And so we met at this apartment. And I said, I understand that you do things to watch. He said, yeah, I make a move and all that stuff. So I had a chronograph, a stopwatch, mechanical analog watch. I said, well, could you do something to the watch? And he said, oh, yeah, I'll try. And he went like this. He cracked his knuckles. And I looked, and the watch hands had moved 25 minutes forward. I said, oh, that's a pretty good trick, So anyway, the next thing was I said, I understand you bend metal. And he said, yeah, I bend metal. He was very cool about everything. So Colonel Shaloni and his wife, the one who introduced the whole thing, was there. And Colonel Shaloni's wife said, well, could he bend my wedding ring? And the husband looked and he said, he's trying to break our marriage or something. Anyway, she took off the gold band, and Uri was allowed to put it in his hand, and he closed his hand over it, and I held my hand over it. And about 2 minutes, he said, okay, I think it happened. It opened up, and I picked it up, and the ring, gold is the most difficult thing to bend or split because it's so soft. A hard metal is much easier. And as I looked at this ring, here's the ring, it just cracked here. It started to bend like this, like a lock washer, okay? And it was just moving by itself, as I was holding it. Well, that was very impressive. So I immediately shipped the thing off to the United States to a fellow named Bill Tiller, who's the head of the materials science department at Stanford University. And he was very good about the whole thing. He ran the thing through the test as soon as he got in 3 days. I heard from him. He said, we've never seen anything like this in metallurgy. He said, where that ring cracked, a part of it looks like it's been burnt with a laser, and the other part of the end looked like it's been fractured at 0 degrees Kelvin. Okay, now I suddenly began to understand something. I wasn't just looking at a human being who could bend metal, repair clocks. I was looking at very high-tech activity at a distance, and this repeated thousands of times. And what all that amounted to, I'll just tell you quickly without going into all the endless details. Eventually, I took Uri to 22 University laboratories. We did a whole stint for over a year at the Stanford Research Institute and so on. So we got an enormous amount of data, but the one thing I want to emphasize is it was a teaching exercise for me. It showed me that hard objects, metals, animals, anything could disappear, even in sealed environments without any damage to the environment, that they could be teleported elsewhere, and that they could be returned from elsewhere, and that these people in the spacecraft had total command of material systems without going into all the endless details. And that was an incredible lesson.
I am Bonner Cox, Executive Director of the Information Science and Engineering Division at Stanford Research Institute. Throughout mankind's history, there has existed a folklore that certain gifted individuals have been capable of producing physical effects by means of some agency, generally referred to as psychic or psychoenergetic. Substantiation of such claims by accepted scientific methodology has been slow in coming, but recent laboratory experiments, especially in the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia, and more recently in our own laboratory, have indicated that sufficient evidence does exist to warrant serious scientific investigation. This is Yuri Geller. One of the types of demonstrations that Geller likes to do is to sit with a group of people and attempt to send a number to various people in the room. With Yuri Geller, this is Edgar Mitchell, who, with his eyes covered, is trying to pick up the number that Geller is sending. Also, we see Wilbur Franklin of Kent State, Harold Puthoff, and Russell Targ of SRI, along with Don Schuick, Vice President for Research at SRI.
Yuri Geller himself says that when he started working at the Stanford Research Institute with Dr. Hal Puthoff, that there was an incident where he was actually taken to meet Wernher von Braun at a NASA facility, and that when he went to meet Wernher von Braun, that he showed him a piece of metamaterial that was allegedly from the Roswell crash.
Now, listen, you've already flagged the other major incident in your career that touches on UFOs. And again, Edgar Mitchell has confirmed a large part of this story to my friend privately. During his lifetime, Edgar, the Apollo 14 lunar module pilot astronaut, was unwilling to say publicly that he'd ever had definitive proof of alien life. But privately, he confided in friends, and I've reported this in my book, that he was aware when he had experiences on the moon, he was aware that they were being observed. And he talked to my friend about blue lights that were clearly some kind of structured craft that were following the astronauts during their time in their lunar journey. But he also talked privately to people about something that happened, I believe, at the Goddard Space Center with Wernher von Braun, the father of America's space program, the former Nazi, who I understand embraced you as a friend, even though I'm sure as an Israeli Jew, you must have felt very uncomfortable with his background. But it must have been a very interesting meeting. And I'm intrigued if you can tell me, please, the story of what transpired between you and Dr. Wernher von Braun.
Okay, first of all, what Edgar Mitchell described you on the moon, that's a tiny thing. Yes, they were followed, but the big thing is, and Edgar says it outright, that a UFO, a craft, crashed on planet Earth. They pulled out bodies of aliens. And that's what Wernher von Braun wanted to show me. This is a photograph of Wernher von Braun and me. He's taking me into his limo, and we drive off to a huge concrete building. But let me now backtrack. One day, Ed Mitchell calls me up and says to me, Uri, there's a very important doctor who wants to meet with you. I said, fine. He says he's a NASA scientist. I said, fine, who is he? He says to me, he's Dr. Wernher von Braun. I say, what? Dr. Werner von Braun wants to meet me. Dr. Werner von Braun was a Nazi. I've got photographs in the museum here. He's among Gestapo officers. I was shocked when Ed Mitchell told me that, but I couldn't resist. No way. So in the end, with some conflict in my mind, because half of my family were murdered by Nazis, I say to Ed, take me. We get to a NASA base, and by the way, at that time I worked with the CIA, and the CIA gave me a tiny Minox German camera. It's also hanging here on the wall, because I spied for the CIA in Mexico, because I was very close to the president of Mexico, and the CIA gave me some missions to do in Mexico. I take that little camera with me, and I give it to my brother-in-law. And I say to Shippy, his name is Shippy, short for Samson. I say to him, Shippy, when we enter Werner von Braun's office, you've got to snap a photo, because nobody will believe me. So we enter Werner von Braun's office. Mitchell is with me, Shippy is with me, and there was a CIA man with us too. The first thing that Werner von Braun does, he pulls out of his pocket a tiny little piece of metal, and Shippy snaps. And Werner asks me to touch the metal and tell him what I feel it is. So I place my finger on the piece of metal, and I tell him, Werner, this is not from here. He says, you're right. This is a piece of a UFO. Okay, wow. Then he says to me, come with me. He takes me into his private office, and there is a safe in the office. He opens the safe, and inside there's a bigger piece of metal, about this big, maybe 12 inches. He holds it in his hand, and he says to me, Uri, now place your hand on the piece of metal. Tell me what you feel now. So I place the palm of my hand on the piece of metal, and I immediately tell him, Werner, this is from a UFO. And he says, you're right. Now come with me. He takes me out to the parking lot, and this is the photo. It's an enhanced photo. Somebody made it, more color. And he puts me in a limo, says, sit next to me. I sit next to him. He gives an order to the driver to drive. We drive into the heart of the base. We come to a concrete building. Nothing is written on the building. There's a soldier standing by the door. He opens the door, and Werner says to me, follow me. We go down 3 or 4 flights of floor into the abyss of the building.
Is it just you?
No, just me and Werner von Braun. Then in the corridor of that 3rd or 4th floor, there are hooks on the wall, and on the hooks are hanging orange Antarctica coats. You know those warm coats that you wear in Antarctica? They're orange in color, but they all had a NASA logo on. He says, put one on. And he puts one on. I don't know what the hell is going on. And then we turn around the corner. We come to a huge metal door. He opens the door, and I see an enormous refrigerator. It's cold. I walk into this cold space, and listen, Ross, I'm definitely not an idiot. And I definitely was not hypnotized. With my own eyes, I see alien bodies. Some were mangled. They're all in glass tubes. I mean, I'm just mind blown, shocked. I was stunned. I froze, and it suddenly everything dawned on me in that refrigerator room that this is all real. Everything that I believed in, it's all real.
Can you describe those bodies to me?
Very similar to the alien figures that we are used to see, the grays. Look, most of them were mangled, yeah? Most of them were, they looked like they were pulled out forcefully out of a craft, or just, I don't know, found strewn around the UFO. But it was mind-blowing.
What did Werner tell you about where those beings came from?
He didn't. We went back to the office. Ed Mitchell was there. Werner gave me a gift. He gave me it's here. I have the camera here. It's a German camera. He said, Uri, you can have this as a gift. I took it because I said I wanted something that belonged to Werner von Braun. And that was the end of the story.
And he took Yuri Geller there specifically to meet Werner von Braun so that von Braun could test Yuri Geller when he interacted with this UFO material to see if he could remote view or telepathically connect with the material directly, like the material itself from the Roswell craft was activated through consciousness. And they wanted to explore the potential as to whether or not Yuri Geller was able to pick up any kind of communication or effectively interface with this material when he began to handle it. And the interesting thing about that experience is that Yuri Geller, when he was taken to meet Werner von Braun at the NASA facility to do this, he straight up says that he was accompanied by a guy from the CIA.
By the way, at that time I worked with the CIA, and the CIA gave me a tiny Minox German camera. It's also hanging here on the wall because I spied for the CIA in Mexico. Michel is with me, Shippy is with me, and there was a CIA man with us too. The first thing that Werner von Braun does, he pulls out of his pocket a tiny little piece of metal.
And when you go look at the original pictures that he snuck during that incident, he had a couple of photos taken when he was getting out of the car and right when he was being shown the metamaterial. And standing right there as the individual from the CIA who took him to the NASA facility was Dr. Hal Puthoff. So if Dr. Hal Puthoff was involved with the CIA and working with Yuri Geller, I find it highly probable that Hal Puthoff was very familiar with the work of Andrei Puharich and carrying the torch where he left off. It gets even more interesting when you realize that in the same photographs and at the same early days of the Stanford Research Institute, right there in the mix of all of it was astronaut Edgar Mitchell. Astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who actually went to the moon and conducted a remote viewing experiment for the Stanford Research Institute, probably directed by Hal Puthoff, where in transit to go to the moon and back, he conducted secret remote viewing sessions to see if he could predict which cards they were flipping over or what that they had revealed. They were Zener cards for doing psychic testing or telepathic testing. And they were able to conclude that it didn't matter that Edgar Mitchell, whether or not he was even on the Earth or within a certain distance, that he could be halfway to the moon or out there on the moon itself and still effectively remote view the Zener cards back on Earth. Edgar Mitchell is also someone who was born in Roswell, New Mexico, and he was the individual who actually put some of the crash materials from Roswell, New Mexico in a shoebox, smuggled to Art Bell in Las Vegas, Nevada, the radio host, and then they ended up in the hands of Linda Moulton Howe. She was basically put in charge of what they call Art's parts, which was these alleged pieces of material from the Roswell crash. Linda Moulton Howe from there was in contact with no other than Travis Taylor, who at the time was a defense intelligence agent for the DIA. He was working for the DIA before he worked at Skinwalker Ranch, and he works out of Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. So he's an astrophysicist and a scientist right out of Huntsville, Alabama, who then reached out to Linda Moulton Howe, said that he was interested in studying the metamaterials. They claimed that they didn't know where they got them from, but it's obvious that they came from Edgar Mitchell. And so Travis Taylor was the first person to study them, and he was working as a DIA agent.
Somehow the pilots became part of the electrical circuitry of the vehicle, vectoring it in a way similar to the way you order a voluntary muscle to move, unquote. The colonel told me how amazed military and science investigators were about the spacecraft functioning as an extension of the being's neurological systems, including their molecularly aligned and strengthened flight suits and hand-imprinted control panels. Next slide. On May 27th, 1996, a third letter arrived containing a surprise. And you're looking at 2 of 6 pieces of metal that came in a box. This is showing the underside, and this is showing the top side, and comparing the sizes to a quarter. And there were 6 of these. They're very, very different than the aluminum. And the letter said, quote, "I have listened with interest to the ongoing reports on the samples that I sent. I noted that the researcher, which was me, discussing the testing of the samples, noted that basically it was merely aluminum. And actually, this is precisely the same initial findings of Granddad's team." And we can go to the next slide. "However, I neglected to include metallic samples of the exterior of the crashed Roswell disk. I now include the enclosed and can only say that these scrapings came from the exterior underside of the disk itself. It literally was a shell-like shielding of the disk, brittle and layered almost with a prefabricated design and placing. Keep in mind that these are the last of Granddad's samples. They have sat for years inside a closet with his personal effects. Because of certain concerns, I will not be contacting you on this matter. Perhaps I am a bit paranoid, but I do have a family and a career to think about. I hope you understand. I hope these last samples are helpful. And of course, I will be listening," unquote. And Art called me and said there were half a dozen pieces, about 2 inches long, an inch wide, and about a quarter of an inch thick. And I proceeded to contact a university professor who, as long as I did not identify him, agreed to analyze the new material. And Art shipped some fragments to him. I had some. And Art kept 4 whole ones in a safe deposit box. On June 8th, 1996, the professor released his first report about the material. He had examined a cut and polished cross-section with a scanning electron microscope and energy dispersive spectroscopy. And he stated in the next slide, "Each sample had a silvery, shiny side with a rough granular appearance. The other side was blackish gray. Looking at the sample's edge-on, numerous layers can be seen. The samples were hard but brittle, and a few small pieces could be broken off using a small hand vise and manual pressure." Quote, "Energy dispersive spectroscopy revealed that the shiny side contained more than 95% magnesium and a small amount of zinc, which later turned out to be 2.4%. Next slide. "The dark side contained a significant amount of bismuth. Actually, from all results that have been done in half a dozen labs, almost 100%. Quote, "The material appears to represent layers consisting mainly of magnesium and a small amount of zinc separated by thin layers containing a high bismuth content," unquote. On the radio, I asked for research help. An electrical engineer and physicist, Travis Taylor, at the Army's Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama, called me up and said he would volunteer to do such an experiment. But he said first that he had to ask his superiors and contacts, who were the Defense Intelligence Agency, if it was all right to work with me on this bismuth magnesium. And he came back to me and he said it was such an interesting conversation because the DIA people seemed to know who I was already. They seemed to have some information about this. And they said that they would approve his working with me as long as he, Travis, kept them informed about what we learned. He said I had the distinct impression they did not know what this was either. First, I asked Travis if he would do a literature search in all the scientific and military channels to see if he could find any references anywhere in terms of even the classified material he had access to about bismuth and magnesium in thin micron layers. And after about 3 weeks, he took a long time. This is what he told me.
Basically, I've exhausted every resource that I have ever tried to use in the past, from about 1940 to now, and I have found no reference, even in government research, for bismuth magnesium layers.
Do you have any thoughts about why there is no reference and yet we've got this material?
Yeah, this material didn't just make itself. It had to come from somewhere. And it's my personal opinion, anyway, that this is either a top secret type thing. Maybe back in the 40s they were doing the first stealth research or something, and it was a stealth craft that crashed, and that's why we haven't heard of it, because it was top secret, or we didn't build it. That's one of the things about this material that excites me, is because somebody had to build it, and nobody has reported building it. And it's a very high-tech piece of material, so if they didn't report it, then why did they build it?
Right.
That's the thing we do in science, is we do some research and then we tell everybody about it. And nobody's told anybody about this material.
Then on September 12th, 1996, Travis tried first 500,000 volts produced by a Van de Graaff generator with a piece of this bismuth magnesium on a plastic insulator. The layered metal at one point moved sideways through the electric field so energetically that it literally went off the insulator. And I'd like to show you this videotape number 1 that shows what happened. Is a sound up? Because you got to hear the snap crackle. Oh, you're kidding. Oh my God, you're missing. I mean, this is, it's making all kinds of. Okay, you just saw that go off. Well, you're missing being able to hear the physicist talk about. He now is talking about what he's doing, which he was so amazed at seeing that there was any motion at all. And he started trying to see if he put his fingers, he's trying to come down through the fields that would be around the plastic cap, trying to see if he can cause the motion. And in a moment, you will see him, he takes a piece of aluminum cap and as a control. And you can still see on this, the bismuth magnesium never stopped fluttering, moving, and especially these sideways motions, both in a 500,000 volt. And then a month later, he did it with 1,000,000 volts. And we had and with the radio frequency signal, and not only did he get the crab-like motion, when he would turn on the radio frequency signal, the metal would go away from, not toward and not sideways. The metal would definitely go backwards. Now he's just showing what a flip-flop piece of, he just cut it out of an aluminum can. We never ever got anything except that little tiny bit of when he's putting his finger right down over it. It never moved sideways. It never moved forward, backward. But in the bismuth magnesium, in both 500,000 and 1,000,000, we had the sideways. Thank you. I'm sorry you're missing all the sound and his voice. The motion he showed to his colleagues at Redstone Army Arsenal greatly puzzled, and everybody agreed. And this is funny. Well, Travis, get us some of this bismuth magnesium to work with.
Let's not forget that Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama is the exact location where Amy Eskridge worked before she allegedly ended her own life. After she came out on the podcast and reported that she was very close to discovering the secrets to anti-gravity, and she also was a whistleblower saying that aliens, or ultra-terrestrials to be specific, were us from the future. And she gave a bunch of stark warnings that if you released information too soon, that these people would show up at your house and burn your house right to the ground unless you came out as a whistleblower to try and protect yourself. But it sounds like even though that's what she did, and she discussed a lot of her work in her last podcast, it still didn't end well for her. So we're sorry that Amy Eskridge is gone. We feel bad for her friends. Our heart and sympathies go out to her and her family, as well as all of the other scientists that have gone missing or have wound up deceased. But let's listen really quick to what Amy Eskridge had to say about Huntsville, Alabama, and the Redstone Arsenal, which is the same place that Travis Taylor comes from.
Disclosure is going to come out of Huntsville, Alabama, out of Redstone Arsenal. Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama is the biggest fucking deal that you've never heard of. It's the biggest fucking deal that you have never heard of. And so we need a documentary to drop at the same time that establishes the credibility. Because the fact is that we have deep and wide, extensive credibility that no one knows about, because you're not supposed to know about it because it's in Alabama, it's obscure. You're not supposed to know about it. That's the point. So we need to establish credibility at the same time that we drop the paper.
People know what Huntsville is. Amy
People
showed
know what Huntsville is? Is that what you're saying? I don't
Jeremy,
think so.
Amy showed me not one, but 2 Saturn V rockets there. One was standing up and one was horizontal.
People don't know what Huntsville is. Huntsville is the biggest fucking deal on the planet that you have never heard of. No, it is. No, like Huntsville is the Silicon Valley of government national security technology and intelligence community technology and aerospace technology. Huntsville is like the hub. Like we are number 3 on the first strike launch list. If first strike happens, 3 targets, Huntsville will be one of them. Alabama. This is Alabama, dude, in the deep south. We're in the top 3 first strike.
But
And
you're
it's because you haven't heard of
us.
us. We're in the top 3 first strike because you haven't heard of us. That's why. It's on purpose. So we need to get that out there credibly before we disclose. Otherwise, it's like Alabama, podunk, redneck motherfuckers. They don't know anti-gravity. You know what I mean? Gah! Yeah, no, dude. I started the Institute for one reason, the Institute. I started it as a public-facing persona to disclose anti-gravity technology through, because I told Mark this. If you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off. If you stick your neck out in private, fuck you. They will bury you. They will burn down your house while you're sleeping in your bed, and it won't even make the news. That's why the Institute exists. So it's a platform of credibility and public-facing persona. So like, sorry, my laptop's falling. So I need to establish that like at least 3 months ahead of time, which is basically now.
And so he tested the original metamaterials from Roswell through Linda Moulton Howe from Edgar Mitchell. And then after Travis Taylor gave them back to Linda Moulton Howe, the very next person to contact her that said that he was interested in studying the metamaterial was none other than Hal Puthoff. And then you hear the reports from Yuri Geller that was Hal Puthoff was working for the CIA at the exact same time, and that he took Yuri Geller to NASA to meet with Wernher von Braun to try and do psionic contact through the metamaterial to see if he could have a psychic connection with parts that were from the Roswell crash. So you can see how all of this weaves together, and it all goes back to the original work of Andrei Puharich, who was obviously working as a double agent for the CIA, the Army, the Navy. He allegedly also was involved in work at the Montauk Project. There's a physicist named Dan Winter who flat out says that he worked with and knew Andrei Puharich, and that he also came out of the Montauk Project. And we know that that used a lot of testing on young kids to try and test their telepathic abilities in the same way, if not more secret, more dark, and more extreme than even the Stanford Research Institute. Now, I think they're going to talk a little bit more about this property in Maine and how Andrei Puharich started organizing these space camps for kids at this property in Maine. And that's another interesting story that they sort of glaze over in this interview that I want to get into a little bit more depth on.
What exactly is going on there? So who is he recruiting to do these experiments, and what sort of experiments is he running at the Roundtable Foundation?
So again, it started with a lot of just basic ESP stuff, can somebody pick up on what's written on a letter in the other room? A lot of, like the card guessing. And then he obviously built a Faraday cage there. And I think, was one of the first people, as far as I understand, doing ESP tests in a Faraday cage, where basically he would like put people who claim to be psychic in the cage. And it was his belief that could sort of, block out anything from the outside, and it would really help the psychic focus and be able to do what they could do.
And he had, Aldous Huxley would go to the Roundtable Foundation,
yeah.
right? And obviously Aldous Huxley is known probably best for a lot of his science fiction work, but also, The Doors of Perception, where he talks about his experience with mescaline. And then, if you really get into the maybe deeper kind of architectures of his thinking, like in perennial philosophy, he's like clearly this kind of deep esotericist. And so he was hanging out at the Roundtable Foundation too.
Yeah, they were good friends. In fact, on Puharich's book, The Sacred Mushroom, which is how I got into this whole thing. I had read that book when I was much younger, and I was really interested in all that stuff. And what's the book? DMT, the spirit molecule. And, I was really into that. And I came across The Sacred Mushroom, Puharich's book, which is very interesting. Have you read that?
I haven't read it. Yeah, I think I have it, but I haven't read it. Yeah.
The premise is basically, and this was also the research he was doing at the Roundtable, was taking a certain type of mushroom, in this instance, the Amanita muscaria, gives people ESP abilities, and they did extensive research on that there. But on the cover of that book, Aldous Huxley gives a blurb for Puharich and calls him, the greatest mind in parapsychology. But yeah, they were good friends. He was there all the time. Again, very interested in what he was doing. Really thought Puharich was like onto something.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and the Amanita muscaria mushroom is a very interesting mushroom. It's the kind of archetypal, emoji on all of our, cell phones or iPhones at least. But it also, I believe, John Marco Allegro, who was a scholar of various, ancient languages, he came to the very heretical conclusion that the Eucharist itself was an Amanita muscaria mushroom. And so the actual transubstantiation involved this like mushroom, and that maybe what Jesus underwent was some sort of kind of pagan mystery ritual that allowed him to sort of gain the magical powers that he achieved in the Book of Acts, and that whole thing had some kind of hermetic meaning that isn't just maybe a literal reincarnation or something. And so that I assume that must have, because I think the name of his book is similar. It's The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross or something. So was there maybe some influence there with Puharich?
I'm sure there was. As from what I understand, when Puharich's book came out, it was it's now sort of like a cult classic, but at the time it was like controversial, because basically people just didn't believe in what he was writing. And that, I think, kind of kickstarted the way people looked at Puharich as being kind of like a kook. But he clearly wasn't.
But he also was he was kind of a pioneer and had a few peers who were also at the forefront of their fields, people like Albert Hoffman, Karl Ruck, and Stanislav Grof, who thought of themselves as creating what they called the new Eleusis, based on kind of, past mystery rituals, the Eleusinian mystery rituals. And they involved ergot and psychedelic substances and, these sort of, Persephone's quest style, you go down, you descend to the underworld, and you come back up, and you gain knowledge of your primordial soul. And so Puharich was, he was amidst this backdrop. He was sort of on his come up, which maybe isn't a coincidence.
We are the positive principles of cosmos. We penetrate, visit persons. We work through this study, but it is under our control. We nine and our will.
The very first time that Andre heard about the nine was through Dr. Vinod.
I've never seen people like this that I've studied. Dr. Vinod had become a channel for a civilization somewhere out there from outer space. It's so alien to our thinking, we can't even comprehend it. They call themselves, these beings, the Nine. I said, what is the Nine? They said, well, it's hard to explain to you. We're not personalities, as you think of personalities. We're more like laws or principles of the universe.
The part of Puharich's story where I think things sort of change in his life is when, you know, this instance happens, when they first channel the Nine, which was...
Okay, before we get into all of this about channeling the Nine, I think it's really important because they mentioned that he purchased a big house that was his first laboratory in Maine. And they sort of skipped over this. They might talk about it later in the interview. But when he had this house in Maine, he would host these space camps for kids. And kids literally thought that they were signing up to go learn about NASA and learn about astronomy and try to learn how to become like an astronaut someday in the future. That's what they thought they were signing up for. And so parents would sign up and register their kids to go to this space camp for kids ran by Andrei Puharich. And what really went on was a lot of psionic operations and a lot of psychic testing. It's very possible that they were put into these Faraday cages, that they were given different electromagnetic stimuli. They could have even been dosed with drugs and all different kinds of things. And the entire thing was a psychic experiment revolving around telepathy and remote viewing. The truth is that they didn't even cover in this interview is that Andrei Puharich and this property in Maine ended up burning to the ground. And there are two different reports and rumors about how this happened. One of the rumors is that one of the competing agencies or a foreign enemy or something like that that didn't like the research that they were doing actually went and burned that house in Maine down to the ground. But another part of the story is that some of these kids went back home after the space camp and after all of these experiments, and they started struggling with essentially the hitchhiker phenomena, where they brought back home paranormal activity with them. A lot of the kids were acting like they were schizophrenic. They were hearing voices in their head, having out-of-body experiences, and having a lot of negative side effects because of the experiments that went on while they were at Andrei Puharich's place. And one of the rumors is that some of the parents, when they found out what was really done to their kids, when they thought they were sending them to a space camp about NASA and becoming an astronaut, when they realized that their kids might have been dosed with different drugs or substances and being subject or like a guinea pig in mind control experiments and telepathy experiments, that some of the parents may have got really upset by this and went up to that house, and they were the ones that burned it to the ground. They didn't really talk about that in this interview, but I think that's a fascinating part of the history, and it shows a little bit of the dark side of what could have been going on in these early days. It also sounds eerily similar to the experiments that were happening at the Montauk Project, where they took all of these kinds of experiments to a whole other level.
But it all started with this guy, Vinod. You may have heard this name. He was an Indian psychic. He came to the Roundtable again through recommendation of somebody Puharich was working with. And the story goes, he shows up in Maine, goes to the Roundtable Foundation, and the first night he's there, he just unexpectedly falls into a trance. And, you know, they're like, what's going on here? Someone grabs a tape recorder, which we have the tapes of. And he goes into a trance and he just starts speaking, you know, saying, you know, we are the Nine and where we're coming through to you now, and just kind of on and on and on about a lot of philosophical new age sort of stuff, basically. I mean, it's really, really, it's a lot. I mean, there's thousands of pages literally of transcripts of what they recorded with him. But that's how the story goes of how the Nine first appears, basically this guy Vinod. But mostly Vinod. So the interesting thing about this guy, Dr. Vinod was his name, he was friends with Gandhi, right? They were really close. So this was something I learned like way later into the process of the film, because this was as it took like almost 10 years, and it was mostly because these new facts and things would just like come up that I never knew, or somebody would say, "Hey, have you seen this?" And so Vinod, like I only really discovered a couple of years into it, but he was an interesting guy.
Okay, let's talk about Vinod for just a second. Now, people have gone back and interviewed members of Dr. Vinod's family, and his family members all basically said that Vinod had never done any kind of channeling, never done any psychic work. He wasn't like a mystic or a guru or anything like that. And his family members believed that all of that was completely made up, and that he was basically charading around North America pretending to be a psychic guru or a mystic from India in order to get paid and get different jobs. I don't know if any of that's true or not. Obviously, if you went and talked to some of my family members and asked them about the work that I do, going out and doing psionic contact to see UFOs show up in the sky, they would all say they've never also seen me do telepathy, and they've never seen me have conduct any psychic experiments or anything like that. And so you would get the same results if you went and talked to my family members right now too. So you have to wonder if that's really valid or not. But also we have to realize too that Gandhi really wasn't that great of a person. He's kind of revered in history as being a great meditator, someone who fasted for many days to try and generate peace, but he was also involved in some really questionable things that a lot of his colleagues and people that worked with him highly criticized. A lot of the people that worked around Gandhi reported that he was doing these experiments where he would basically sleep naked in bed with young women in order to test his spirituality, to see if he could resist the urges to try and do anything or be intimate with these young women. And so he went for a long period of time where Gandhi was having young women come and sleep with him in his bed at night. And he presented this as kind of a spiritual test to see if he was really truly refined and if he had overcome the temptations of the world. All of that is really suspicious to me. All of that kind of calls into question sort of his motives, if he was really doing that. If you really wanted to prove that you weren't going to be tempted by being intimate with underage girls in your bed at night, how about you just don't bring them into bed with you at night? I mean, that's the easiest way to do it. Just reject it outright. Why would you even bring it close to you or invite that kind of reputation or that appearance into your life? And a lot of his colleagues and people that worked around Gandhi were questioning him quite a bit about this while he was going through all this. But that's all about Gandhi. It's a little bit off the topic. Let's get back to the interview.
And it is very, very little information on this guy. I mean, we tried to dig up like everything we possibly could, but that's what we know about him. He was a professor at university in Bombay. And again, with Puharich, like he never mentions any of that. His version of the story is this guy, they just randomly came in, fell into a trance, no context, never mentions it. So that begins this like, okay, what's really going on here? Because he clearly has a background that's interesting that he just never mentioned. And then when Vinod leaves eventually, I think 54, he goes back and it never talks about him again. There's this huge moment in his life. The 9 comes through this guy, and he just sort of like never talks about it. I think that's where the conspiracy starts, as far as what people believe to be like, I guess, a psyop. I mean,
right.
We don't have to get into that now, but
no, I want to get into
yeah.
the psyop elements of it, but it sounds like fundamentally he's a believer in extrasensory perception, psychic abilities, right? He's not cynical about those things, or is he? Puharich, yeah.
No, yeah, that's, I think, a big question, and even now, I always think, but I mean, yeah, there's just no question he was interested in that.
Yeah, and earnestly, or do you think it was some front?
Oh, earnestly,
for like,
yeah.
Okay,
oh,
because
for sure.
and we'll get into this in a little bit, but that they're also possible prosaic explanations around exotic electromagnetic wavelengths that can cause, thoughts to be implanted in people and stuff, which is nuts.
Yeah.
But I think he wouldn't reduce everything to that, would be my
No.
rough understanding personally.
No.
Yeah.
So, no, definitely not. Yeah, there's a lot to get into there. But basically, so what did the 9 say?
Yes.
And so, again, it's a lot. So I have to give a shout out to Dick Russell. You know
Yeah,
Dick Russell?
I do.
So he's awesome.
Great guy.
And he's written some amazing books.
Mhm.
And so he was friends with this woman, Marianne Shenefield, this, allegedly amazing psychic. She passed away, but I got to know Dick, and he said, I met Puharich once. In fact, I tape recorded an interview with him. It was 94, literally the year before Puharich died / was found dead mysteriously. But he recorded an interview with him because at the time Dick Russell was wanting to write like a definitive book about MK Ultra, and he wanted to interview these people involved in it. In fact, he has one of the only interviews, as far as I know, with Sidney Gottlieb. He spent a whole day with him. He literally told me, just showed up at his house and said, "Hey, yes or no, will you let me interview you?" And he said yes. And so he has that. So this was part of that research he was doing for a book. But
just for the audience, real quick, because I know we're getting into what the 9 said.
Yeah.
But Sidney Gottlieb was known as the kind of U.S. version of Joseph Mengele, a poisoner in chief, an architect of MK Ultra from the technical staff services. So that's wild. Dick Russell spent a whole day with him.
Yeah.
So what are the 9 saying?
So yeah, it's a lot of the sort of usual, I guess, channeling talk where there's this idea that there's been this surveillance of Earth, and that they've been monitoring Earth, and they've been seeing the negative things happening. They've been seeing wars, they've been seeing nuclear weapons, and they're wanting to help, basically. The general message is this idea that they are wanting to help the human race, basically not destroy itself. This, goes on way through the 70s when Puharich, the 9 come back. But it was basically a lot of, trying to help humanity. It was a lot of like, you've probably heard a lot about how sometimes these channelers are, what is it called? Like remote writing, when someone's in a
automatic
writing. Automatic writing. There was a lot of like very complex equations that would come through, that would, the 9 meaning Vinod in a trance, speaking as the 9. A lot of like, write this down because you'll understand later what it means, sort of stuff. And we have this notebook that he wrote everything in. It's really, I mean, maybe, I'm sure you might know somebody who could look at this. I mean, I'm just making the film. I mean, I'm very...
Well, we should see if any of it checks with actual science or math.
It's crazy. They would say, the 9, they would say, okay, look, you're contacting us through a psychic, but if you want a clearer feed, a clearer transmission, you have to put the psychic in a Faraday cage. And on top of that, you should tweak the Faraday cage and build it this way and use this type of metal and use this type. They were telling him and constructing him how to like build the Faraday cage in a specific way that would like help this transmission. And it did.
Whoa.
Because you can hear the tapes. It was very like stalled speech and waiting. And then when they did the Faraday cage sessions, it was like just boom, they would talk. So I heard that and I was like, okay, well that's weird.
Now they're going to talk in a moment about the individuals that were there during this seance when they claim that they were channeling the 9. The whole thing is very suspicious. It could entirely just be a mind control experiment in order to manipulate these influential people who would go on to run major corporations. Like Arthur Young ends up inventing the Bell helicopter. There's people from the DuPont family. There's people involved there that ended up being kind of affiliated with the JFK assassination and all of that. But one of the interesting things when you get into the individual stories from the people that were there in the room when they claim that they started to channel the nine. One of the events that they claim happened was several apports. Now, an apport is when something manifests into the third dimension, into our reality, essentially out of thin air. Like when you watch a cartoon, like Roadrunner and Coyote or something like that, often in that cartoon, you see the character like Coyote, he'll just reach behind his back and pull out like 1,000-pound anvil, and then he tries to like push it off a cliff to catch the Roadrunner, right? And you have to wonder, well, where in the world did that anvil actually come from? He pulled it out of thin air from behind his back, and the coyote doesn't have any pockets. I know that it's a cartoon, but essentially what it demonstrates in the cartoon world, they call that invisible dimension where anything can appear into the cartoon reality. They call that hammer space. Ancient Vikings had a similar belief where they claimed that things could manifest out of thin air. In fact, the entire creation of the universe came from this cosmic nothingness or a void that they called Gonunga Gap. And the idea behind an apport is that you could meditate and reach a certain altered state of consciousness, and then things would manifest into physical reality out of thin air. It's almost like a magic trick where you pull a rabbit out of a hat, where something comes out from nothing, from our awareness in the third dimension and our limited field of perspectives and perception of what we can see. It's like it's coming out of the ether or out of a higher dimension or an alternative place. And in the story, some of the witnesses that were there claimed that they actually saw a physical hand manifest above the table that presented each one of the people sitting at the table with an apport. Some people say it was like a piece of fabric. Some people say it was like a gold chain, or they received different items. But basically, every single person sitting around the table supposedly was given a gift from an alternate dimension as sort of a totem or a token, marking them that they would be special, that they would be influential, or that they would have a major role to play in human civilization as they continue to live on their lives. And all of the people in that room ultimately did. They had world-changing inventions. They ran major corporations that have products on the shelves that you probably have in your house right now that they invented and created. Like I said, some of them were suspiciously involved in elements of the JFK assassination, which radically shifted world history and events. They all played a different role, and the story goes that they actually all received an apport or a gift from an alternate dimension. So if we're talking about this just being a mind control experiment, then we're talking about really in the early days of exploring all this, receiving information. If it's a psyop, then they must have had the ability to create a hallucination or control reality to the level that they weren't just projecting telepathic messages and channeling into the seance, but they were actually manifesting something from nothing. They were bringing something invisible out of thin air and producing a hand that appeared out of the ether above the table and gave each person around the table a physical object that they carried around like in their pocket the rest of their lives as a token of the memory of this event. So if it was a psyop and it was just mind control and they were doing experiments, they either all agreed to lie about that, or the manipulation was so strong and the technology used clear back in the day was even beyond what we can fathom, where they were able to have someone invisible come into the room and it appeared to give them all a gift from a higher dimension out of thin air as an apport. So I find that really interesting. It makes you really question on the edge of this, how much of this was real, how much of it was not. And you even have to think, if the Council of the Nine are real interdimensional entities, how do we know that their intentions were good and they weren't just manipulating these potentially influential people in order to direct the course of our linear timeline and to change history and sort of remote control or puppeteer events in civilization. So by picking people like they're chosen and they're going to be special and they're going to receive messages from these higher dimensional beings, they could then steer the course of humanity in a direction that they want to go. So is that a good thing or is it nefarious? Were the things that they were involved in, like potentially the JFK assassination and the invention of certain cosmetics and different products, like we know that DuPont is involved in a lot of weapons manufacturing that has been used in war? How do we know that the Council of the Nine are actually benevolent beings and that they were influencing this group for good or for the bad? So all of that you have to take into account. And the whole purpose of this video and why I'm doing it is to illustrate once again, like I have in the past, that when you get into ufology on the surface, it sounds like it's going to be really fun. You want to just get into it. You want to learn meditation. You want to go out and learn remote viewing. You want to expand your consciousness, and you have all these good intentions inside of you. But then when you actually dig into the history, you realize that the dark side of UFO disclosure is the fact that there was a lot of psyops, there was a lot of manipulation, there was child experimentation and exploitation, and there was a lot of mind control and attempts to use frequencies and substances like in MK Ultra and the Montauk Project. And there is this whole dark side of UFO disclosure. That is one of the reasons why I think UFO disclosure is a really complicated mess. When Donald Trump comes out and says they're going to release the files on UFOs, I'm sure that all these different federal agencies, if they're actually going to release them, are going to have to go through all of that and highly redact and be careful about what they release. Not because necessarily that UFOs or aliens are necessarily dangerous or a threat to us, but because they don't want to expose themselves and this dark history of how they actually got to the conclusions that they reached. How did they actually develop the means to crash a UFO and to capture aliens? What did they do when they studied them? How many children were used and manipulated and involved in mind control technology and remote control technology, trying to plant false memories and conduct experiments on little kids and people with autism? There's this whole experimental dark hand and dark side of UFO disclosure that I think is a lot scarier to them than UFOs and aliens on the surface.
You need to use that, and it needs to be, you know, these dimensions, I mean, really specific stuff, and they would follow it. So they were basically like following instructions from the Nine.
And you see the results get better as far as their channeling.
You see the results get better. And that, again, to me, I just thought that's interesting, because it's not just sort of like, you know, spiritual mumbo jumbo
hand
stuff.
wavy stuff that's like totally unfalsifiable.
Yeah.
It's like literally like the transmissions are coming. When you say that it's getting better, it's just like more gets channeled, like more substance.
Yeah, more information, clearer,
yeah,
just sort of more precise. And the other thing too was, again, it was this thing with copper, where they would also say, okay, what you need to do is you need to get this is really crazy because of what happens later on in his story, but they would say, you know, you need to have copper touching your skin. And so you would need some sort of like bracelet or something that would kind of like constantly be touching your skin in order, again, for like the transmission to be better. And they would do that.
Whoa.
And what's crazy is one of the space kids that I met and that we interviewed for the film, she whipped out this was, you know, only a couple years ago. She whipped out this bracelet she had that was like a little copper plate on this bracelet that she said like they all had to wear when they were doing their channeling sessions with him decades later. So the copper thing is strange. And Puharich obsessed over that. And that's the other thing to me, you know, being a little skeptical. I was like, well, someone of Puharich's, you know, academic abilities, like clearly he wouldn't take the time and the energy like to look into this stuff as deep as he did, you know, like he like obsessed over this. He would go meet other academics. Hey, does this check out? And, you know, he really like was obsessive about this being legitimate.
And Phyllis Schlamer, who later wrote The Only Planet of Choice, which channels the 9, I think she talks about the 9 with respect to messages around the Earth being a bottleneck of consciousness, right? And like other planets being more ascended, and these 9 really trying to help raise consciousness on Earth, which might sort of sound like a cliche, but
one thing that they were doing at the Roundtable was that this psychic, this one particular psychic, would claim that at a certain time of night they would see an orb, and they would go outside by the ocean and they would see orbs, and this happened. And the only evidence I have is Puharich's own writing, because we have all of his journals, and he writes this in his journals where he literally says, like, this psychic would just blurt out, 11 o'clock, tonight, and they'd go out and they would see an orb.
Whoa.
And I just thought that was interesting, because if there's so much talk of this orb stuff going on currently.
So right there, I just want to mention that this also lines up. If this psychic medium that was receiving specific times in which to go outside and witness orbs, this is something that I am personally a firsthand witness of, and that I know that it is something that is real. And I'm going to say that confidently because of my friendship that I have with the psionic asset Mike Batista, who is the head psionic asset from Team Skywatcher, the UFO capture group that works with Jacob Barber, who came out as a whistleblower. All of these guys are government guys and ex-military guys that go out and do psionic contact to essentially summon UFOs to show up in the sky.
My name is Michael Batista. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a former U.S. Army Green Beret, 3rd Group.
And Mike, do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has been visiting this planet?
Yes, I do.
When you make that statement, how confident are you that is true?
I'm extremely confident.
Do you feel like you believe that is true, or do you feel like you know that is true?
I know that it's true.
When did your experience with the phenomena begin?
The first experiences I was having was in my early teens, and it started to accelerate as I grew up. And as my time in the military was ending and I was getting out, it really accelerated at that point.
And when this happens, can you explain how it usually manifests or how you experience it?
It usually manifests as something anomalous in the sky, orbs, crafts, different pyramid-looking objects, moving at extreme rates of speed and doing very angular movements.
When you do this, are there other people around? Do they actually see you doing this?
I have multiple witnesses that can testify that that is a fact.
And how many times do you feel like you've been able to summon something in the sky?
Anytime I want.
I'm out with Mike Batista, the psionic asset.
What's going on, everybody?
We're at a spot called the Little Black Mountain, where there's a bunch of ancient ancestral Puebloan petroglyphs. How many toes are on that foot? Kind of looks like a map. This is the petroglyph I filmed at last time I was here and sat in there and had a whole spiritual experience. How you feeling about tonight, Mike?
Well, it's hard to say. I think we're just gonna go out there and do what we do, and hopefully we get what we need and not necessarily what we want. So,
where do you want to go tonight?
It's a good question. We have a few spots we've been scouting, and I mean, we had really great success last night. I'd say at a bare minimum we could check that place out, but I knew you had mentioned a few other spots, and as the day develops, it's gonna kind of really dictate where we go. But last night we
We had an area we wanted to go to, and we just kept driving and
Kept
driving.
going and going, yeah.
We found a spot. We actually ended up turning around, and as we turned around, we saw our first UAP of the night. And then as we were driving down the road, it came right back. Right, hey, that's the spot. We pulled right off.
And on more than one occasion, in fact, every single time that I've worked with Mike Batista, I will get this subtle impression inside of me where I feel like something's going to happen tonight. I feel like something's going to happen. And then I'll turn and ask Mike, I'll say, hey, Mike, what time do you think they're going to show up? And Mike Batista, without much hesitation, he'll even flat out say, well, they pinged me or they told me they're going to show up at 3:20 in the morning. And he is exact on the money about what time they're going to show up. He'll say at 3:20 in the morning. And like the last time that we went out and worked together, we went up by Zion National Park. And this is a spot I had never taken him before. It's a spot that I had never been before to do this kind of work. I've only been up there to ride in a UTV out on the sand dunes to go look at some ancient petroglyphs one time. It's a spot that I've driven up that road, but usually in the daytime. I've never gone up there. I didn't even have a place picked out where we were going to pull off the side of the road and do all of this. And so we were like, were we going to go over to the Anasazi Trail? We could go out to this spot behind my house and try it, but there's kind of an airport nearby, so we don't want to get that in the way. Where do we want to go? And so ultimately, he just let me pick, and I was like, let's go try this new spot up a road by the coral pink sand dunes by Zion National Park. So Mike didn't even know the place we were going and had never been there before. I had never done it there at night. And we drove up there and we parked. We actually drove clear up the road and couldn't even find like a good spot to pull off. And we passed this one location that looked really good, like it had an open view. And we kept driving for like another 4 or 5 miles up the road before I was like, I think we need to just turn around and go back to this spot that we passed, see if we can find a better place, because there's just too many trees right here. And so we really were just making it up as we went along to try and find a spot. And this was like at 11 o'clock at night. And we ended up turning around and going back to this spot. So Mike had no idea where we were going to be actually working. There's no way for him to stage this or set this up. And sure enough, I asked him, hey, Mike, what time do you think that they're going to show up tonight? And he said, and he looked at me and he flat out said, well, they pinged me. They're going to show up at 3:20 in the morning. And so I was like, okay. And so we just focused our meditation around that. And they actually showed up initially basically right at midnight, and they lasted, and these orange orbs appeared over the horizon from about midnight to 12:15 for about 15 to 20 minutes or so. And then there was literally nothing for over 3 hours. I actually sat in a camp chair and wrapped up in a blanket because I got cold, and I fell asleep in the chair. And then right before 3:20, almost right on the dot, Mike said, hey, what's that? And it woke me up, and I jumped up from my chair, started looking through the night vision camera. And sure enough, right at 3:20, we had dozens of glowing orange and white orbs that appeared in the horizon that were flying down and going up and moving horizontal, moving in and out of the canyons above Zion National Park. There's another one above, right above the mountains going across, real bright, real bright. Wow, that's really bright.
Come on, there's two of them. Come here.
Wow.
Huge, dude. Come here.
There's another one above it. There's two. Look at that one going down now. It just dropped down. There's three. That's a big, wow. That was like a triangle that appeared. There's another one above, right above the mountains going across, real bright, real bright. Wow, that's really bright.
Come on, there's two of them. Come here.
Wow.
Huge, dude. Come here.
There's another one above it. There's two. Look at that one going down now. It just dropped down. There's three. That's a big, wow. That was like a triangle that appeared.
Big triangle. Big triangle right there.
Man, that woke me up. How do you guess the time like that, Mike?
They told me.
Yeah, you literally said earlier, you're like, they pinged me. They said they were going to come right around 3:20, and it's like 3:10. Another one's showing up really low across the ridge line. Very, very faint.
This way, Joey. Look in this direction.
There's one right in the saddle.
So you can't even see it.
Look how bright it got. Look at how bright it got.
Yeah, I just saw it. So if you hold on, I'll get the other night vision to see it.
You know what's funny? It's like they went away when we turned all the music on, and then we turned the music off, and they showed up again.
Well, I did predict 320 though.
You did predict 320. I'm just making observations. I don't think the music has anything to do with it, but there's another one right there. What's that?
They probably just hate our music.
Maybe. Wow.
Yes.
There's one up high.
Look at it. Look here. Look in this. Hold this. Look at it.
That one's way up high.
I see 1, 2, 3, 4.
There's several of them going across there.
They're all going down, right?
Yes.
There's one up high.
Look here. Look in this. Hold this. Look at it.
That one's way up high.
I see 1, 2, 3, 4.
There's several of them going across there.
They're all going down, right? You got the right spot?
Oh, I saw a huge flash. Two of them moving. There's 1, 2, 3 right now.
And this is something that I can confirm is a real thing, and that Mike Batista has literally done it every single time that I've worked with him. You can just flat out ask him, hey, what time are they going to show up tonight? And he'll think for a second and say 4:25. And it's not like he says a rounded off number like, oh, around 3 o'clock or around 4 o'clock. He's like 4:25 or 3:20 or 4:22. And he knows almost down to the minute, and he's been right every single time. So whatever that's worth, when I heard this part of the interview, I found it very interesting that they were experiencing this all the way back when they were doing the communication with the Council of the Nine. It could just be that that lady was connected and she was very telepathic and psionic, and she had sort of the same gift that Mike Batista has. But I can tell you, I've been doing meditation a long time, and I personally can't predict down to the minute when they're going to show up. But Mike sure can, and it sounds like this lady definitely could.
And he did many experiments where he allegedly took photos, which of course, weren't in the big stash of photos we had from back then, but he that's what he claimed, that there was like orb activity. This would have been, early 50s again. Yeah.
So trippy. Yeah, no, that almost sounds like Chris Bledsoe or something. These people who seem to attract these orbs, and it would make sense because those people also seem to be sort of high psi, or have higher kind of mind matter capabilities or whatever. Seems like there's some sort of correlation there. The connection Lavenda makes is that all these people conducting the seance, bringing in these 9 maybe extraterrestrial beings, maybe beings that go to the 9 Egyptian gods or whatever.
Yeah.
We don't exactly know what these 9 beings are, but it's like a council. And later the 9 plays prominently because this channeler, Phyllis Schlamer, like gets all these messages from the 9 along with a lot of the kids and stuff.
Yeah.
But that all of the people in this original seance with these blue-blooded elites are also entangled with the JFK assassination, which is so crazy.
To make a long story short, there's a seance that's held in late 52, early 53. I think it was the New Year's Eve of 52 to 53. And there are 9 people involved in the seance. Now, these are not just some casual 9 people you pick up like, your neighbors or something, right? This was a DuPont and an Astor and a Forbes. I mean, everybody that represents the blue-blooded Brahmins of American society, old money people, were at a seance, a freaking seance, right? In the woods in Maine on New Year's Eve with Andrea Puharich. And one of them is the guy who was the inventor of the Bell helicopter, right? So
Is that Arthur Young?
Arthur Young. So Arthur Young is there with his wife. His wife is Ruth Forbes Payne Young,
Mhm.
right? She had a lot of names. She was excessively nomenclatured. And so you have, Ruth Forbes Payne Young. She's a Forbes.
Mm.
She was married to a George Payne, Lyman Payne, and also married to Arthur Young.
So in that seance with the, these kind of blue-blooded elites that Puharich is convening, I think one of the people who's close with Mary Bancroft, who's Dulles' mistress, is a woman named Ruth Forbes Payne.
Yeah, Ruth Forbes Payne.
And so
yeah.
she's a Forbes first.
Yeah.
So again, go into the blue-blooded elite thing.
Yeah.
But I think her daughter is Ruth Payne, who
Mhm.
takes in Lee Harvey Oswald.
I know.
And Lee Harvey Oswald is living with Ruth Payne, and I think gets a job at the Texas Book Depository in Texas, in Dallas, through Ruth Payne,
Mhm.
and then ends up, maybe not being the lone gunman, but, attempting JFK's life.
And in her home, she opens her door to some refugees, people who are recent immigrants from Russia. Lee Harvey Oswald and his wife, Marina,
Mm.
and their kids.
Whoa.
So they're living with Ruth Payne in this house in Texas.
So,
she
wow.
gets him the job at the Texas School Book Depository.
Yeah.
And so it's these weird entanglements where, and the 9 believed themselves to be sort of agents, or sorry, the group in the seance believed themselves to be agents of these extraterrestrials, right? Like,
They kind of glazed over again Arthur Young and who that guy was. Arthur Young, most notably, is the inventor of the Bell helicopter. And a lot of times when people mention him, they just kind of stop there like, oh, he was an inventor. But it's so much deeper than that. If you look into the life of Arthur Young and you read the books that he's written, which I've read several of them, and he also gives a lot of lectures that you can look up on YouTube. But Arthur Young actually planned out according to strategic astrology down to the day where he felt like his astrological alignment for the day that he was born, the day, the month, the hour that he was born, and the location that he was born, that put him on a particular path according to astronomy and astrology, that he planned it and actually delayed taking the plans and the blueprints for the Bell helicopter into the corporation where he actually sold the plans and achieved the invention. And this is something that he attempted to do as a experiment on his own consciousness. Arthur Young was not an inventor. He wasn't an engineer or a physicist. He had never done anything like that before. He just decided that one day he wanted to push his consciousness and see if he could manifest something into reality out of thin air simply through the process of meditation. And his entire philosophy revolves around, like, even when you study physics, you study engineering, you study the true nature of reality, that the actual acting agent and the substrate of physical reality is consciousness. It is intention. It's these untangible, invisible things like passion and love and your own thoughts and your willpower, that you actually turn the course of reality and you manifest things into reality. And so he came up with this plan. Why don't I try to come up with some impossible goal that nobody thinks I could do, that I don't even know if I believe that I can do? Let's see if from out of thin air, I can just begin a thought experiment and go from the first day of meditating about it with an open mind. And through that process, can I actually manifest something into reality? And in the initial thought experiments, he started receiving these visions during his meditations where he felt inspired about, okay, you could create a type of propulsion where if you have a gear that sits this way and another one that sits this way, then there could be a lever that pushes it, that turns the whole thing, and then it moves forward. And ultimately, as he meditated with this and thought about it, he started drawing on paper and kind of channeling this inspiration. And then ultimately, he started building these small models out of paper and cardboard and balsa wood, to where pretty soon he started inventing these small, like Leonardo da Vinci style flying machines, where he ended up having one gear that would turn another. he would wind them up with like rubber bands, and then he would let them go and the propellers would turn, and he just would meditate on this process and align it all with his astrology and astrological signs and the timing of the universe. And ultimately, he reached the goal where he was able to take finished plans, patents, and blueprints for the invention of the Bell helicopter. And now the Bell helicopter is something that has changed aviation and helicopters that we see in the air all the time. But this all started from a philosophical concept and a meditation that Arthur Young was just doing as an experiment on consciousness. And so it makes you wonder if he was there involved in these seances as part of the Council of the Nine, if he actually saw an apport come out of thin air and manifest something and hand it to him. That probably radically shifted his perception of reality, his view of astrology and how the universe works. And he believed the actual substrate and the driving force behind everything that happens and appears in reality actually comes out of consciousness, out of an invisible idea, something out of nothing. So I find that really interesting. If you're curious about that, definitely take the time to go look up Arthur Young and read about his life and the things that he's done. It's really fascinating.
Want to hear something really strange about that?
Oh yeah.
So
that's why you're here.
This woman who I got to know very well, who's in the film, she was Puharich's assistant for many years, and starting in I think 63. And basically, she worked with him, I think, until like the mid 80s. And she's amazing. She's from Hawaii, very nice woman, but she met him in New York. She was a student at NYU, and Puharich is working. This is a whole other thing to get into, but he had started his company there called Intellectron Corporation. But she started as sort of an intern at this company, Intellectron, which was basically a biomedical research company. We can get into that. But basically, she told me a story that she was working at Intellectron the day JFK was assassinated, and that these men in suits, she says, came into the offices, went into Puharich's office, said something to him that seemed very serious, and they left. And she said the whole rest of the day, Puharich was out of sorts.
What?
This could be as simple as, how horrible that the president was shot, or it could have been something else. But she was very specific to say, I remember this happening. It was very strange. But to finish the 9 thing, basically in the roundtable ends in 57, I think, right? Meaning they for whatever reason, I mean, I think I know the reason. Basically, he moved on to Intellectron, which I can talk about, but he claims that we ran out of funding, the benefactors lost interest, and it shut down. But all the while he was getting money from the army. I mean, there's records of that. But so the 9 stopped allegedly, and I think Lavenda talks about this, but a lot of like the early 9 related conspiracies start around that time too, with this idea that it was a psyop, or that it was this early psychological warfare experiment where can we get, certain groups of people to believe in something, and to what extent. And a lot of people think that was like the 9. They think that's all it was. They think any sort of like real channeling or any is just, is fake, and that it was all set up as this sort of psychological warfare experiment, which, there's reasons to think that that could be true, but that's where a lot of that starts.
I think that's possible, but you think about like when did MK Ultra start? It was there's probably stuff going on before 52, but really the Korean War is like when conventionally it's dated to, and the idea that they were that sophisticated at the very start of MK Ultra, where they could convince these sort of elite members of society that they were in touch with these specific extraterrestrial beings, and that those extraterrestrial beings were constructing Faraday chambers that were able to like make the messages they received more effective, like
Yeah.
this elaborate sort of magic trick that
Yeah.
seems a little beyond the pale to me.
Yeah.
But that's
it's a big mystery. I mean, even I'll admit it, the years and years I research, I mean, even I don't know. Like a lot of people I talk to who are interested in this stuff and know about the film and so forth, like they think that I know all the answers, and like
Sure.
I wish I did.
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm hiding something because I'm worried that, you know, I'm going to be monitored. I just don't, you know.
Yeah.
I know what was in the archives, and a lot of the film for me was like, okay, what do we know? What is a fact? And let's like work off that.
Yeah.
And so it was really just like, okay, here's the transcripts, here's what they were saying.
Speaking of what are the facts, we have to get back to this Intellectron thing.
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah.
is the implication
Yeah.
of this story that this company had something to do with the assassination of JFK, or like were these men in tweed suits raiding the office, the CIA, and were they thinking that Intellectron had something to do with this, or?
So Puharich, yeah, he leaves the Roundtable, he moves to New York City, or he moves to Ossining. A lot of people know this in relation to Puharich because he lived there most of his life.
Upstate New York.
Yeah, it's an hour on the train north of the city. You know, Mad Men, of course, the show.
Yeah.
Like I didn't even realize all the characters, they all live in Ossining. Like Don, I guess I remember watching it, but there's some reference like they live in Ossining. So it's a very, you know, wealthy area. And all of a sudden, Puharich has what's considered like a mansion there, basically, a huge house. He moves there. He tells his family that basically he just got this contract to study basically like more of what was going on at the Roundtable Foundation, but there were specific people who needed him to move to New York. So they moved there. I mean, his family life is a whole different thing. He had his wife sadly committed suicide around this time.
Really?
Yeah, he was very like, you know, distraught about that. And
what happened?
I received a grim call from Jenny's father. Jenny had quietly leapt from the hospital roof into eternity. I wept for Jenny. I wept for my failure to keep her healthy and happy. I wept for our 3 daughters who would never know a normal upbringing. I cried out to God in crushing despair.
But so they moved to New York. He starts this company called Intellectron. He gets Annie Jacobson helped figure this out. He gets a grant for $300,000, which at the time would have been like at least $1 million or more, from the Atomic Energy Commission, which is strange. And we have all the documents that we found that prove that they went and visited him. They gave him this grant. So he starts this thing, Intellectron, which is basically labeled as a biomedical research company. So they have an office in Hell's Kitchen. And again, with Puharich, I have to stress, like, there was always these instances in his life, this one being the really the first, but it was sort of the Roundtable too, where like all of a sudden he just has this company and this and these employees and this fun, you know, all of a sudden it's just, you know, kind of expensive to have a big office in New York City and all this state of the art at the time electronic equipment. And
well, it sounds like in classic intelligence world front sort of stuff.
Well,
like how does Epstein have a huge hedge fund?
Oh yeah, he just always had, and it's always this company. And basically, this was early 60s, now 62, 63. This is when he starts the hearing experiments, where basically he claims that deaf people would come into the office and they would do research on them, and basically they designed a device which would enable deaf people to hear, basically by emitting a certain frequency that would somehow bypass like the normal way we hear and go directly to the hearing center in the brain. And it was this breakthrough medical discovery, which go figure, goes completely quiet. No one ever hears about it.
Yeah.
Again, they kind of glazed over the space camp for kids topic a little bit. And I want to dig into that a little bit further and the connections. Now that they've talked about the JFK assassination and how all of that went down, there is a lot of evidence that has come out that the people that were involved directly in the JFK assassination were originally a team that was organized by none other than Howard Hughes.
Getting recruited, because of Bailey's office, and I actually found out what was going on in the Watergate burglary, which, by the way, was all about the Kennedy assassination. That's what it was.
Well, wait, can you help us understand that?
That's totally a long story.
Okay,
but
and I don't.
I'll give you the brief.
Give me the brief, because I do want to. I want to dive into that Elizondo stuff, and I'd love to hear about that. But I would love to hear about this connection.
Okay, yeah. Bottom line, the reason that Richard Nixon ordered the White House plumbers, who were made up of 4 of Santos Trafficante's gunmen, and the wiretapping specialists from the CIA to go into the Democratic National Headquarters in the Watergate Hotel was because he was afraid that Larry O'Brien, who had just been made the new head of the Democratic National Committee, who had prior to that time for 20 years been the chief lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for Howard Hughes, the multi-billionaire. Yeah. It turns out that Howard Hughes, back in 1960, when Richard Nixon was the vice president under Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, as vice president, chaired the 5412 Committee of the National Security Council running covert operations.
Yeah.
And it turns out that Howard Hughes was a CIA secret NSA consultant. Did the Glomar Explorer, built the Glomar Explorer to pick up Russian submarines.
Yep.
Did the big Spruce Goose that was the prototype for the C-5A transport. Did a lot of other major things for them, real top secret things. And so Richard Nixon is back in 1960 when he was vice president under Eisenhower. Now, the burglary is in 1972. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, because he's getting set to run for his second term because he's won the 1968 election after Bobby was killed.
Right.
Right? And so he's getting set to do his second term. And so the burglary takes place on June 17th of 1972. He's running for his second term. Right? But the bottom line is when he realized that what's his head had just become made head of the Democratic National Committee, Larry O'Brien, he said, holy shit. He's saying, wait a second, he was the chief lobbyist for Howard Hughes. He may know that I'm the one that actually called Howard Hughes and had Howard Hughes set up the assassination team to kill Fidel Castro and Raul Castro. And it turns out those are the people that killed the president.
Wow.
And if it ever comes out that I, back in 1960, through Howard Hughes, set up the assassination team, which in fact killed the president.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever going to believe me that I didn't order that.
And so
I'll lose the election. So that's why he sent them in.
When you're saying this is who killed Kennedy, you are saying it with some real authority. Yeah, but you're also saying it like everybody knows this, which I don't think everybody knows this.
No, but we got to interview Trafficante, who's the one that set up the assassination team. That Howard Hughes got his lawyer, Bob Mayhew.
But who is hiring that team?
Howard Hughes, basically. Howard Hughes is because Richard Nixon asked him to put together an assassination team to kill Fidel Castro.
But no, I'm saying if these same people shot Kennedy.
Yes.
Who told them to shoot Kennedy?
Actually, it was Allen Dulles, who was the previous CIA director of the CIA.
What's the reasoning behind that? Why did they want to take him out?
Well, actually, the exact reason was that not after the Cuban Missile Crisis in April of '61, but the Cuban Missile Crisis. Right, the Cuban Missile Crisis of October of 1962, that we had come so close to having a thermonuclear war at that time that both Khrushchev and John Kennedy were totally traumatized by what had happened. And so that they both, after the resolution, on the 19th of October of 1962, and they stood down, and Kennedy agreed that if Khrushchev would take the missiles out of Cuba, Kennedy would take the missiles out of Turkey that they had there. Bottom line is they settled that, and they avoided the thermonuclear war, but they'd come to within almost 2 minutes of having total nuclear exchange.
Yeah.
So the two of them were so traumatized. What they did is they opened up a completely secret line of communication with each other, that they were exchanging 18 different letters back and forth. There was a guy by the name of Norman Cousins that was running the letters back and forth between the two of them. And in the exchange of letters, John Kennedy, after the October missile crisis, going over into the beginning of 1963, that he and Khrushchev made an agreement that they were each going to exercise their respective authority as the chief executives of the U.S. and Russia to start ordering the disassembly of all the nuclear warheads.
Howard Hughes actually funded and organized a group of people, and this is even weirdly affiliated with the Mormon Church, because Howard Hughes, his main guy was that ran everything for him was a guy named Frank Gay, who was a Mormon, a member of the Mormon Church, and they ran a lot of Howard Hughes's operations through a network of Mormons that were nicknamed the Mormon Mafia, that purchased all of his land for him, did a lot of business deals for him, and provided a lot of cover from the public for Howard Hughes to do activities, obtain contracts, purchase land, and to stay anonymous. Howard Hughes actually was the one in charge of putting together an assassination team to go down and take care of or assassinate Fidel Castro. And when all of that didn't end up playing out according to plan, it was the same assassination team that allegedly went and handled the JFK assassination. And Howard Hughes is a billionaire, a philanthropist, this inventor that lived in Las Vegas, Nevada. And the way that, now, if you hang with me here, it gets connected and really strange, because Howard Hughes was one of the first guys to obtain a contract in the state of Nevada from the military and the government to do radar testing or phased array directed energy weapons testing. And initially he got in trouble because he was conducting tests on parts of Las Vegas itself. So he was directing the radar and doing like mind control and behavior experiments on the population of Las Vegas, Nevada, on the civilians and the people living there. And then they were told basically, okay, you can't do that. You can't do these experiments this wide open on civilians. And so he purchased over 70 pieces of property around Nevada and began conducting these experiments there as well. Meaning that there was a property that you guys know, if you watch this YouTube channel for a while, that I went and researched, called Mount Wilson, Nevada, which is about 80 miles north of Area 51. And one of the things in the history of that property was that Mount Wilson Ranch was originally owned by a guy named Benny Binion, who is from opened the Binion's Casino. He was a mafia guy, and there was loose affiliations between the mafia, Benny Binion's, the Mormon Church, the Mormon Mafia, and Howard Hughes. Clark is dropping bombshells on us. He's making a phone call right now. What's his name, Doug?
Doug Shear.
Doug Shear. I didn't want to say the name wrong. Doug Shear, who we've talked to and interviewed before.
He's very popular. He's very into the history of Nevada. He's like one of the last old timers.
Yes.
He has so much. He's really a neat guy to talk to. You know, you talked to him in a brief interview.
Yes. And he's got a book with pictures and documentation.
I had to go next door, fucking Lemmings. I thought he was gonna die.
He's got
what's happening?
A book with Howard Hughes in
With
it.
his fucking heart.
Everybody up here is having heart attacks and brain problems and getting cancer.
Yeah, I just went over there and fucking just visited him, and he's like, What the fuck, dude? You all right? He's all pale and shit.
Oh shit. So then we start talking about the Howard Hughes Company and how they had the first psychotronic directed energy system contracts, and all of the evidence says and rumors are that he was up here and he's the one that put in the runway.
Since he never left the Desert Inn, he needed a team of executive assistants and advisors to oversee his business dealings. This team was led by a man named Frank Gay, who was curiously known as Bill. Gay was a Mormon that Hughes had hired right out of UCLA.
And so it's very probable that Howard Hughes at some point owned the land at Mount Wilson, Nevada. This property at Mount Wilson, Nevada eventually became a research location that Robert Bigelow purchased, who is the owner of Skinwalker Ranch for about 8 years during the 1990s. And 2 weeks before he purchased the land in Utah that we know today as Skinwalker Ranch, Robert Bigelow also purchased this land called Mount Wilson, Nevada. And at Mount Wilson, Nevada, directly on his research team that went there was none other than Hal Puthoff, Dr. Hal Puthoff. So this connects not only through Howard Hughes, but also back to Hal Puthoff and Andrei Puharich, because we talked earlier about how Andrei Puharich introduced Yuri Geller to Hal Puthoff, and that's how they started the Stanford Research Institute. Now all of a sudden we see Robert Bigelow, who mysteriously looks a lot like Howard Hughes, and a lot of people don't know exactly where he got his billions of dollars from. They say that it was from, he started a hotel chain or a budget motel chain and became really wealthy. But it's almost like Robert Bigelow looks very similar, has the same mustache, the same facial structure and everything as Howard Hughes. And there are rumors that Robert Bigelow is one of the illegitimate sons of Howard Hughes, and that when he was going to college and when he turned 21, that suddenly he inherited a large trust fund and all of the money from the assets of Howard Hughes. And so you see Robert Bigelow suddenly picking up where his father may have given him all the money and was involved in aerospace engineering and radar testing. And suddenly you see Robert Bigelow investing in properties like Skinwalker Ranch and Mount Wilson Ranch, and bringing on as his lead scientist none other than Hal Puthoff, who was involved with Andrei Puharich. And Hal Puthoff is direct colleagues with Eric Davis and several other people. And Jacques Vallée was also there at Mount Wilson, and they all went from Skinwalker Ranch to Mount Wilson Ranch. One of the interesting things about Mount Wilson Ranch is that after Robert Bigelow, before he purchased the property, if this was during a timeline when Howard Hughes may have secretly owned it through other people, at one point it was used as a Christian camp for kids. And so it makes you wonder if this idea of doing a space camp for kids was something that was always also being conducted at Mount Wilson Ranch in Nevada, where they would invite these kids up to go basically to a Christian camp, this outdoor camp for kids. And secretly, they weren't telling them that there was a bunch of mysterious electromagnetic field testing or mind control testing, or even that there was potentially a UFO hiding underground that they may have been using the kids to try and do telepathy or to communicate with it to find where this UFO was hiding underground.
Hughes preferred working with Mormons because he knew they didn't drink, smoke, or gamble. He thought this made them more likely to avoid being tempted by the vices of Vegas and handle his business with greater discretion and integrity. Hughes was so committed to using Mormons that they wound up composing the entirety of Gay's team.
According to the weather, we got maybe 2 hours before full blizzard, so we got to move fast.
Okay. Andy, Paul, and the team at Mount Wilson Ranch.
have one chance to try to blast their way into 2 abandoned mine entrances that might connect to an underground tunnel system, leading to what is rumored to be a buried UFO.
Mine 2 gave us a lot of pause because it looked like it was intentionally filled.
Okay.
And our question became, why would anyone take the time to fill a hole? If it was a non-productive mine,
you would just leave it. And who filled it in? Who and why? Did Bigelow do it, or was it done 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago? Right.
now all of this, like I said, is at the mines themselves, but the same land mass actually flows down to something called a lower meadow. And then we took it to the magnetometer, and this is what our magnetometer showed us.
Oh, look at that.
This square area here, this is the lower meadow.
That's clearly artificial. That looks like a phased array. Sure does. Looks like a phased array antenna system built under the ground. You see where I'm going with this, Eric? Mm-hmm. We've heard rumors that certain low frequencies in that range could be used to not only detect UAPs, but possibly even take them down. But I never knew them to bury them. They were always on the surface. Like a low frequency beam or something? Well, just a phased array radar. The rumors that is actually radar that brought down the Roswell thing, assuming it was real. You know, I don't have any evidence one way or the other, but my point is that's just another one of the stories we've heard that kind of fits in the why Bigelow would have been interested. Right. But if Bigelow would have found that, he would have stayed.
The reports are also that Robert Bigelow himself has owned and ran space camps for kids, that he had one in Colorado. And the rumors are that he had this big cabin in Colorado where he would have a bunch of kids come out to space camp, that they all had to wear matching white shoes, and they were doing remote viewing and telepathy experiments, exactly like we hear about with Andrei Puharich and the experiments from the Stanford Research Institute with Hal Puthoff. So you can see the chain of events that goes all the way back to the Roswell crash, all the way back into the 1950s with Andrei Puharich, MK Ultra, the Montauk experiments, UFO crash recovery programs, the Council of the Nine, psionic contact and operations using telepathy to communicate with interdimensional beings, and Yuri Geller going from Andrei Puharich to Hal Puthoff, and then Robert Bigelow maybe inheriting all this money from Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was the guy that hired the team that ended up being the ones that were involved in the JFK assassination. People from the Council of the Nine working with Andrei Puharich were involved in housing people that were involved, that worked at the book suppository, that were involved in the assassination of JFK. And underlying all of this is this weird mystery of UFOs or aliens kind of pulling the strings or telling them what to do, manipulating the course of humanity as we go along, and them doing unethical potential experiments on kids to try and interface with this phenomena to see what's going on. It goes all the way up to Hal Puthoff being there at the Stanford Research Institute, being at Mount Wilson Ranch, doing work as the lead scientist for Skinwalker Ranch, all of this going on clear up into the 1990s. And so you can see how this is an intricate web that's very interesting, that sort of ties all of these characters all together. And the modern story that we have today, where you see Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis showing up on these documentaries like Age of Disclosure, you have this entire dark underbelly of mystery that involves the JFK assassination, that involves all of this weird weapons contracts and directed energy weapons, inventing mind control techniques where they're trying to remote control people. You have CIA or FBI showing up at Andrei Puharich's house right after the JFK assassination, almost like maybe accusing him of being involved in creating a sort of Manchurian candidate, or being involved in the stuff that was going on in the research, that in the formation of the team, because there was people involved in the JFK assassination that sweared up to their death that they had no memory of even playing a part in it. It's like their minds were erased, or they were mind controlled to be a part of that. Now, that could have just been a cover story that they were saying, but when you look at all the details, it all ties into MK Ultra and mind control and manipulation, communication with aliens, or the Council of the Nine that are sort of manipulating and changing the course of humanity. And it goes from clear back in the early days when Andrei Puharich was studying magic mushrooms down in Mexico with shaman, and then they are learning how to build Faraday cages and direct frequencies directly into people's minds to make them see things and hear things and remote control them like a drone. And all of this kind of follows like a thread all the way up into Skinwalker Ranch into the 1990s. And so it really makes you wonder how much of this developed out into what we know today, because Jacques Vallée, who was there at Mount Wilson Ranch, who's been at Skinwalker Ranch, who's deeply embedded into ufology, he was one of the original inventors and innovators that built the internet. He was there and involved in talking with Ingo Swann, who was the lead psychic at the Stanford Research Institute doing remote viewing for Hal Puthoff. Jacques Vallée would go and sit with Ingo Swann and interview him and say, how do you communicate messages and do remote viewing? Does telepathy really work in the universe? How can we transmit messages over long distances and communicate without having a wire there or wirelessly or whatever? And Jacques Vallée took these conversations that he had with Ingo Swann back to his work in the development of what they called ARPA. And ARPANET was the initial phase and invention of what we now call the internet. So the public, we got the internet that came from ARPANET, and ARPA eventually became DARPA.
There are those who believe that this same technology could also be used by DARPA as a new form of mind control. Like their counterparts at the CIA, DARPA-funded researchers have spent decades investigating how the human mind can be altered. In 1965, DARPA launched Project Pandora, which studied the possibility of using microwave radiation to control human behavior. The project reportedly ended in 1969, but DARPA's investigation of how machines can affect and possibly control the brain continues to this day.
There are explicit programs of DARPA to read and write to human brains, whether it's through direct implants within the brain or wearing some kind of cap. So these things are being worked on, and we know that.
So what's the next step? Maybe the next step is we can send instructions and information to an actual person from a distance with this kind of technology to let another person control their actions. But that could be something that could be malicious.
If there's some way to do it from a distance, a much greater distance than something that you can wear on your scalp, that would be the ultimate technological achievement that would fall into this realm of mind control and direct human-machine interface that DARPA may well want to keep secret.
But what about the other sample on the table? Those are pieces of bismuth.
A layered bismuth and magnesium sample. Bismuth layers less than a human hair. Magnesium samples about 10 times the size of a human hair. Supposedly picked up in the crash retrieval of an advanced aerospace vehicle. Looks like it's been in a crash.
In Las Vegas back in June, physicist Hal Puthoff came pretty close to saying that this weird wedge of metamaterial came from a crashed saucer, but he can't know for sure. Puthoff and his colleague, Dr. Eric Davis, are on the cutting edge of attempts to identify an assortment of bits and pieces that are seemingly beyond anything we can create. This one sample is engineered in layers thinner than microns through a process unknown on Earth and for a purpose we can only guess.
Nowhere could we find any evidence that anybody ever made one of these. When we talked to people who in the materials field who should know, they said, we don't know why anybody would want to make anything like this.
Astrophysicist Dr. Jacques Vallée has been analyzing mystery metals since the 80s, often using the technical expertise of Stanford University and Silicon Valley to unravel unknown samples acquired from all over the world. Vallée pointedly steers clear of any military funding, and he shared his findings at public conferences.
We have multiple samples now from multiple sources, ranging a wide variety of integrity.
These days, former intelligence officer Lou Elizondo helps to collect and protect unknown chunks for the To the Stars Academy. Before that, he ran ATIP, the Pentagon's secret UFO study, the same one which released the now famous videos. This summer, To the Stars launched Adam, its own effort to find and study pieces of material that may have been stashed away for decades after being retrieved from the sites of close encounters. Elizondo says there are legitimate reasons why the military and now private groups are in a race to figure out these materials.
What our internal efforts are to potentially, I'm not saying we're doing this, maybe replicate that technology, or to reverse engineer that technology, right? Now you're getting into some sensitivities that you don't necessarily want everybody to be privy to.
Hal claims that they even have the properties to micro-size waveguides for terahertz frequencies.
It turns out that it reduces the size of the required microwave guide for terahertz frequencies down to about 1/30th of the wavelength, which is amazing. So it means you can basically put 30 waveguides in the volume of a single waveguide at terahertz frequencies.
Got it. Thanks a lot, Hal. Really appreciate it.
The group quickly became known around town as the Mormon Mafia. By the mid-1960s, Las Vegas was heavily influenced by people who were either members of or associated with various American mafias. While Mormon businessmen had been the ones to encourage the growth of the relatively shady gambling business, they were simultaneously concerned about what it was doing to the city's image. They eventually realized that the solution was to arrange for the mob-owned casinos to be purchased by someone with a more legitimate image, someone like Howard Hughes. Worried that if his involvement was generally known, he would get gouged on the purchase prices, Hughes' casino buying spree was ultimately enabled by E. Perry Thomas, who would pose as the buyer in Hughes' stead. His involvement remained a secret, and by the time that secret got out, the billionaire aviator already owned over a dozen properties in the town.
So do you know the original story of how it was kind of procured initially?
The story was that it was sent anonymously by someone claiming to be an Army officer.
Long story short, this Army officer was going through his grandfather's archives when he found this rare sample.
And then written in the diary was that it was a piece from Roswell.
The entire DARPA program where they are developing human interfaces and implants like Neuralink and things, where they're implanting microchips and things into the brain to try and remote control people or try to make paralyzed people be able to walk again. It's the entire weaponization of this, and it all revolves back around Jacques Vallée, Hal Puthoff, Eric Davis, and obviously Andrea Puharich as their predecessor. And so this whole intricate web has this dark side. So that's why I keep saying when the UFOs files come out, part of the reason why it might be difficult and the spooky side of what ufology all contains and what it's all about, it might be because of all of the secret unethical things and experiments that they were doing on civilians and potentially on kids that thought they were going to space camp, or people that were visiting Mount Wilson Ranch, potentially security guards that were patrolling at Skinwalker Ranch. All could have been like guinea pigs where they were experimenting with these directed energy weapon type things in order to see if they could mind control them, make them think they were seeing UFOs or paranormal activity, or maybe they were actually trying to do both. You have to get the money from somewhere. And so even if you're looking for UFOs or if you're exploring the paranormal, your funding ultimately comes from people that want to use that information for weapons development, for government contracts, and for these contracted secret agencies. So the whole thing is layered in mystery. And I just wanted to make this whole video and talk about this topic and draw light and go into a little bit more depth with this interview on the Jesse Michels podcast, because I think that a lot of people, like I said earlier, get into UFOs because UFOs are really fascinating. They're really cool. It's fun to go out and do psionics and look for them. But a lot of people just are not aware of the dark side, of the manipulative side, the MK Ultra aspects to this, the human experimentation that actually is involved underneath the surface in some of these programs. and how a lot of these people who on the surface might have originally had good intentions, how their work and their research was ultimately used to develop mind control systems, remote control systems, to develop artificial intelligence, to create DARPA, and all kinds of other things that are really spooky to think about.
But that's when he first starts this whole, radio frequency stuff, voices in the head kind of stuff, which again was under this, we're researching on deaf people, we're doing this, in a medical sense, we're helping people. But that's when these, men in suits show up. That's when, once again, he's getting contracts from Navy, CIA. Again, almost everyone that was involved at the Roundtable was back in this Intertwined situation with him. And so that, I think the connection, I don't want to just jump to conclusions, but I think what I've often thought with this JFK thing and why to Melanie, his assistant, seemed like such a big deal is that it may have had some tie-in with a mind control, sort of like a Sirhan situation with Lee Harvey Oswald. I know that's like a pretty crazy, bold claim, but that's just what I've thought.
It's not
because
that,
they were doing that. We're talking, and again, this is something I don't think a lot of people know. And I think people don't realize a lot of that MK Ultra stuff happened much earlier, but they were doing this work in 62, 63 of like basically sending messages to people's
with Howard
heads,
Hughes as well.
And we have footage. We have, it's real. The people from the Atomic Energy Commission write very clearly in letters we found, like we went, Annie Jacobson talks about it, I think, in her book. Like one of the guys was like, I don't believe you, test me, and just and did the test on himself, and it worked. And then it goes dark, and Intellectron closes, and all of a sudden it's on to the next sort of, mysterious company.
Deep Black program or some other front company.
Yeah.
That's really, really trippy. Is there any explicit connection between Lee Harvey Oswald and Intellectron, or that sort of speculation on your part?
I haven't looked, but I just think, if you want to go there, it's like Lavenda says, the whole connection there at the Roundtable, and then this weird incident where they seem to make a big deal about telling him about the assassination. At that exact time, that exact year, they're researching ways to be able to send messages to someone's mind to do something specific, Manchurian Candidate, et cetera, et cetera.
Apparently, Dulles did not want the fact that Ruth Paine had actually been at the Summer House or whatever. I think that summer, right before JFK was assassinated.
Yeah.
She did not want, that at all on record. I think Mary Bancroft started to talk about it, and he he kind of acted like he didn't know what was going on when he would have reacted earnestly if he hadn't. He clearly did know what was going on. And obviously Dulles was probably, among a very short list of people. If the intersection of capabilities, motivation to take out JFK, Dulles has to be on anybody's short list.
Yeah.
And then to further kind of steelman there maybe being a there, we know that Jack Ruby was an MK Ultra patient. 95%, you have letters between Jolly West and Sidney Gottlieb, who's definitely the kind of architect of MK Ultra, and Jolly West was, UCLA psychiatry, but clearly very involved in Operation Midnight Climax and maybe brainwashed Charles Manson. And he sees Jack Ruby, who never remembers killing Lee Harvey Oswald, in his jail cell alone, no cameras, comes out and says, Jack Ruby has had a psychiatric break. And then Jack Ruby, who was fully lucid but just didn't remember having shot Lee Harvey Oswald, talks about Jews dying outside of his cell and just literally cracks. So
goes back to
very,
Howard
very
Hughes.
Strange, possible connections.
Well, the other really strange thing at this time was that Puharich was working with someone named Jose Delgado, who you probably might know who that is.
Delgado, an old friend of mine, a brilliant researcher from Spain, implanted radio receivers in the heads of bulls.
Delgado has remote control of the animal. Do you realize the fantastic possibilities if from the outside we could modify the inside? Could we give messages to the inside?
He was a guy from Spain. He was a researcher. He was involved with a lot of this sort of mind stuff in the 60s, late 50s, 60s, but I think he's mostly known as somebody who did experiments with putting an implant in the head of a bull and basically being able to remote control a bull and basically say, go this, stop, go left, go right. And he was able to do it. There's literally footage of the experiment happening.
Can you see now the connections between all of this and the dark aspects that lead up to DARPA and MK Ultra and ARPANET and the internet and everything that we see going on is this dark underbelly to the topic of UFOs. There's no coincidence that all of this is connected and goes all the way up. I don't think it's currently connected with Skinwalker Ranch, other than the fact that you have Travis Taylor, who was the original person back when Edgar Mitchell brought the metamaterial from Roswell, gave it to Linda Moulton Howe, and smuggled it to Art Bell in Las Vegas, the same place that Howard Hughes is at and where Robert Bigelow is at. Then you have Travis Taylor, who's the defense intelligence agent, who was the first one to test that. And then it goes from him directly to Hal Puthoff. And then you see Hal Puthoff and Travis Taylor both wind up working at none other than Skinwalker Ranch. And Travis Taylor is still at Skinwalker Ranch to this day as the lead scientist there. So what did Robert Bigelow really do? And what experiments were they really running at Skinwalker Ranch when Hal Puthoff was the lead scientist there? What is the reason for Travis Taylor being at Skinwalker Ranch today? Is it just about UFOs and ufology, or does it have something more mysterious to do with the effects of the work of Andrei Puharich that connects directly through Yuri Geller to Hal Puthoff and the work that they were doing at the Stanford Research Institute? And remember, Andrei Puharich was the first guy who was developing these techniques for transmitting messages into the brain for people who were deaf. And one of his primary patents that he invented was that you could put fillings into people's teeth, and then you could transmit messages or frequencies into their teeth, and they would hear voices in their head.
That type of experimentation, again, there's footage of them doing an experiment on a woman. There's no sound, but it's obvious what's happening. You can see, she's in the other room. She's behind a wall. They're in the other room. He has his device that he invented in the early 60s called the TD100, which I've told you about. And this basically enables like a certain frequency to be sent to somebody. And, it's kind of like a situation where if you're exposed to this frequency, it's at a certain wavelength that only you can hear and anyone else around you can't hear. And this kind of ties into what he was doing later in the 70s, but they're doing an experiment on a woman using this, and it's very clear what's happening, and it's very clear it's working. This was like Neuralink, basically.
And you could send or implant thoughts to a person.
Yeah.
And that's crazy. And so how exactly did it work? You played a tone and then you would...
Well, there's two things. One of the things he invented back then too, which again was Puharich says himself was classified, and you've probably heard of this, is the tooth implant.
A device could be inserted into one of your back molars that acted as a transducer that could send signals across the facial nerves into the hearing centers of the brain.
It took about a month of daily therapy, and they would have their hearing improve significantly.
It was extraordinary because it was a totally new way of understanding how we hear. You could send signals to someone secretly. It had a lot of potential.
We gave a demonstration at the Pentagon. We fitted this device with its general and we had somebody out in the hall broadcasting, and he said, "God damn it, I hear it. God damn it, I hear it. The bastard did it."
It was basically a radio receiver that would be, I guess at one point it was Puharich kind of says it as though you could slip on some sort of thing, like onto like anyone could just kind of like slip this thing on their tooth. But in other instances, it was very specific about it being like a real like cat. What do you call it? A molar or like something that would really be put on your tooth, and that would basically be able to receive a radio signal. It would pick it up here, and it would send it through the nerves of the face that would basically connect to whatever area in your brain you register, sounds. And so you could be, again, you could clearly see them doing this. And this was a short distance. Like I said, a woman right across the room. And you can clearly see they're able to do it. So you can imagine if the research continued, at what length can this go? Can this be in another town? Can it be in another state? Could it be in another country? So that's what they were experimenting with. But so the first part of it was the tooth, where you could send the message to the tooth implant, hear it in the head. And the second part was an offshoot of that, where basically, from what I understand, you sort of just bypass the whole tooth thing. And it's a very specific radio frequency that I guess you can't tune into like on a normal frequency band or a radio. I mean,
do you know what frequency?
No, he doesn't talk about it.
Yeah,
There's a
that would seem to be extremely classified. Would be my guess.
It has a lot to do with sine waves.
Yeah,
I must say again, like this is not my forte. Like
sure.
A lot of this I stumbled into. I don't study, but it was this idea that again you would bypass the tooth, and the frequency would essentially just be sent directly to the head and be picked up in that same area that the tooth was essentially connecting to.
Yeah, just to also substantiate what you're saying to the audience who might think we're crazy. I mean, as early as Beethoven, he was deaf, and he used something called bone conduction, where he would bite onto a conductive rod while he was playing piano. That would bypass his ear canal, and the vibrations would literally play in his brain, and so he would like de facto be able to hear his own playing without actually kind of hearing it through his ear canal. So that is a thing. There's a story there's a kind of apocryphal, but I think substantiated story around Lucille Ball, who had just...
I've heard about this.
It's in the telepathy tapes.
Yeah.
And
right.
she had gotten a tooth filling or whatever, and she's driving, and she starts to hear the radio in her head because she still has some metal in her teeth. I think there's a story with Puharich, where some guy who works at a metal mill or something.
Yeah, that was his first aha moment, is that they got a mental patient, a guy who claimed he was hearing voices, but his family's convinced he's sane. And we're worried because they want to put him in a mental hospital, and we don't want that to happen. So, can you check him out? So they bring him in, they get to know him, and he says, okay, I work at this metal factory where I guess it basically is like grinding metal pieces and this kind of thing. Annie Jacobson talks about it too in her book.
Puharich's theory was that this metal dust had somehow collected on his teeth, and in essence, acted like a radio antenna.
We found out he was tuned to station WOR in New York.
And they put the mental patient in their Faraday cage, which blocks out all electronic signals. And the mental patient suddenly is no longer hearing voices, is like perfectly sane.
And sure enough, as soon as we locked the door, the sound ceased. Open the door, the sound would come on.
That's pretty remarkable of Puharich to think that all through and to test it in the laboratory.
And that kicked off like all of this research where it said, okay, well, if that's possible, like what else is possible with that basic idea that that's, real.
Yeah, and if you can bypass the ear canal with vibration, whatever is processing the audio ultimately in the brain, we know that you can turn molecular mass into frequency. Everything has a quote unquote resonant frequency.
Yeah.
This sounds woo-woo, but what I just said is fact.
Yeah.
Could you then use some sort of electromagnetic, radio wave or some wave that connects directly to the brain. And that kind of gets into freaky territory because you end up in sort of psychic warfare, that's ubiquitous or whatever and
Mhm.
widespread. Like, it's kind of weird to think
Yeah.
about. But I mean, if you're saying that was possible back then, it's just wild. And then you mentioned sine waves. I just interviewed a guy named Dan Sherman.
Yeah.
And you texted me when you saw the interview because you said you felt like it kind of comported with a lot of the stuff you had been studying around
Yeah.
Puharich. If Puharich is doing this stuff in the 60s,
Yeah.
then it kind of makes me believe the Sherman stuff a whole lot more, which was happening in the early 90s
Yeah.
around messages he's downloading.
Yeah.
But maybe it does beget the question, is the Sherman stuff genuinely, extraterrestrial, or were people beaming messages that were extraterrestrial to test the veracity of the messaging or whatever through him? And I don't know.
It's my belief that Geller was sort of like a mind control guinea pig in a way. There's a lot of context that would prove that was what his sort of role was in this whole
Explain
Puharich
that
story.
that's fascinating.
Well, he so basically Puharich in the 60s, so we had Intellectron, and the thing is too with this device he invented, the TD100 it was called, which is called transdermal 100. But again, this was supposed to be this breakthrough, medical device where people who are deaf can hear, think about what we could do with this. But it just goes like, again, he never talks about it. No one in his family, oh yeah, I wonder whatever happened to that. Like, you would think that with such an amazing discovery, like something would have come of it, or it was just like went dark, basically. Probably around 68. He never talks about it. Again, only way later in his life. He never ever talks about it. Of course, we learned he was using it with the space kids years later. That nobody knew about that. But so he's coming off the tail end of all the Intellectron stuff, right? Right when he meets Geller, like literally, it was 1970 is when he first hears about Geller, goes to Israel. Intellectron is still happening then. I mean, from what I understand, like it was still very much, an operating company. So he's going to Israel to meet Yuri Geller while he's still very much involved in the research of essentially sending messages to people. And he gets to Israel. He discovers Yuri Geller. I mean, I think a lot of people know this story, but Geller was allegedly this very amazing psychic guy who could bend spoons with his mind and read people's minds and do all sorts of things like that. He could like hover his hand over a watch and it would the hands would move and all these kinds of things. And so,
do you believe he could actually do those things, or do you think that was stage magic? Or
all I can say about that is he did bend a spoon for us when we did the interview, and I don't know how he did it.
Whoa.
So that's all I can say. It could have been a trick.
And
but I can't to this day figure out how he did it.
The easy debunks on things like that? Or,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So all I can say is like, yeah, it could have been a trick.
Yeah.
But it was definitely kind of strange and cool, and he did do it. But so Puharich, again, the story goes, Puharich was kind of smitten with Geller, and oh my God, this guy's, an amazing psychic. I'm interested in psychic phenomena. I want to study him. So he brings him back. But what people don't really know, unless they read Puharich's book on Yuri Geller, which is kind of like a rare book to come across, but he has this whole episode in Israel before he even brings him back to the United States, where he basically hypnotizes Geller, and the nine come through.
Really?
And all of a sudden, after however many years, 53 from when Dr. Vanad did it to 71. And guess what happens? He starts channeling the nine, Yuri Geller. And so Puharich is, apparently shocked and, I can't believe this is happening. There's all these tape recordings we have of this going down. And that kind of kickstarts again, the whole nine thing comes back into the picture through Yuri Geller. And all of a sudden, they're like back, and he's channeling them, and he's communicating with them. But it's very strange because Puharich, as I just said, was still very much involved in the Intellectron Company, which, as we know, was experimenting with being able to send voices, send thoughts to people. And so one could assume that Yuri Geller was a, experiment in that way.
So you have to wonder, why are all these people revolving around Las Vegas, Howard Hughes, Robert Bigelow? Uh, why these same characters like Hal Puthoff and Travis Taylor are all involved in the metamaterials and their ability to respond to human telepathy on a molecular level? And what would that have to do with the development? Like Jacques Vallée has been to Skinwalker Ranch. We've got pictures of him at Mount Wilson Ranch. And then you've got Bigelow owning these space camps for kids, and Andrew Puharich had space camps for kids doing these. I'm not alleging that this is what happened, but is it possible that a lot of this is that UFOs in some sense are a cover story for deep secrets involving MK Ultra and its evolution, to where you can use a place that has Native American folklore and history around people seeing ghosts and skinwalkers and UFOs, and you can pick this UFO hotspot, and then you could really experiment with people by pointing directed energy weapons at them, or certain frequencies channeled at them, maybe even from a satellite or from a small device or something, and then make people think that they're seeing ghosts or see UFOs, or manipulate their consciousness in order to connect with the real phenomena, potentially. Maybe they really are seeing UFOs and seeing into alternate dimensions, and they're fascinated with all these aspects of the edge of reality. But ultimately, underneath it all, there is this really spooky side where it is definitely all connected, and you can see that the underlying motivations and intentions of the research of Andrei Puharich that could have followed all the way up through that program involves basically using radio frequencies, phased array systems, bouncing signals off of the Van Allen belt down to fake UFOs, and project images into people's minds. And I'm saying all this as someone that thinks and believes and goes out and does psionic contact with people from inside the program that have worked in the UFO capture program. And I go out and see them for myself in unplanned ways and can verify that these things are real. And I'm pretty sure nobody's pointing a hallucination device at my head when I'm having these experiences. I even go out alone and I still see them and have these experiences. And so it's really fascinating and interesting to even try to fathom where the edge of all this is, and how these dark programs, or maybe even secret societies, kind of are using this knowledge and information about consciousness and reality in order to maybe weaponize it, or to get money from military contractors in order to research all of this stuff. So the whole thing is really fascinating. We'll watch a little bit more of this interview, but again, there's like 2.5 hours more to go, and we're not going to cover the whole thing tonight. I just wanted to give you guys the beginning of all this. I think it is an amazing interview. Let's listen to just like a little bit more, and then we'll call it good for tonight.
I mean, there's some people I met during the process of this who were like, don't even go there, and don't talk about the connection he had with Delgado. But, I was interested to.
No, it's fascinating. You have a guy who's being able to pacify a bull and play the bull like a video game, and that clearly was the heir to MK Ultra, which was mostly sodium pentothal, LSD, that sort of thing. It was chemical based. If in the early 60s we had chips that could control animals, and you had heirs to MK Ultra like MK Often, which were done, I believe, at the Science and Engineering Institute in the Northeast as well.
Yeah.
It's like, well, of course, we're going to be way more advanced on that stuff now. It's creepy to think about. It's one of those things you don't even want to think about it, because the second you do think about it, you get into reality being far weirder than we could ever imagine.
So yeah, if you think, okay, they're putting an implant in the head of a bull, like you say, basically remote controlling the thing, why wouldn't you try to do that to a human being? I mean, why wouldn't you? And I think that was going on at Intellectron. I mean, I'm sure of it because there's way too many connections. I don't have a document that says here's the experiment we did, but that whole decade of the 60s was such a odd decade for Puharich. He was so like quiet. Like there's all these records of the Roundtable, tapes, photos, everything. And all of a sudden you get to the 60s, it's like nothing really. Very little documentation, very little, photographic evidence of what he was up to. And all of a sudden in the 70s, boom, picks back up. There's 100 photo. So it's a very mysterious decade. And it just so happened to be when he had this company in Electron.
Yeah.
With these very odd connections, Delgado.
I think it's becoming super clear that,
and the other thing too,
yeah,
not to cut you off, is I've with all this stuff in this film, I've gone to like the ends of the earth to try to track down, and nothing, absolutely nothing. This place never existed in Electron, saying that Puharich had experimented on him with mushrooms.
Wow.
And had experimented extensively with him with hypnosis. But again, like that story is crazy. And I think it's like, okay, like if you can get somebody to believe that they had been teleported and what else could you get someone to believe? And I just think it was all part of that type of experimentation. And Puharich himself, way later in his life, like I said, when he starts to kind of reveal things, he says himself, I was involved in a program and my boss was the guy who did all research with hypnosis and mind manipulation. So, he was doing it. And I think a lot of the Geller stuff was just like, okay, we need a guinea pig here to see if some of these wild ideas work,
So wild. I think there's a story too that Geller tells around him meeting Werner von Braun and Werner von Braun taking him to a safe that contained some UFO artifacts, maybe from Roswell.
Yeah, well, Werner von Braun, again, was somebody close to Puharich in the 60s specifically.
Really?
Yeah, his assistant, the same one I told you about who made the JFK comment, said, yeah, he talked to him, all the time.
What?
So that was yet another person who was just kind of part of his, Rolodex. But yeah, I think Geller said something to the effect of, he showed him some photographs of something from Roswell or revealed facts to him.
And I think he showed him material, and I think he felt like he had a telepathic connection with the material.
Werner von Braun takes me into his personal office. There's a safe in the office. He opens the safe. I see a piece of metal. I've never seen such a color. Pulls it out. It's not heavy. Says, Uri, touch this. Tell me what you feel now. I put my hand on it and I say, Werner, this is not from here. He says, you're right. This is a piece of a UFO that crashed on our planet.
So it's like he knew that it was not from here or something. Like he showed it to him and he goes, it's not from here. And he goes, how did you know? It's so interesting.
The other thing too, and this goes back to the Controllers book, a lot of the stories, and again, keep in mind, this is all coming to the U.S., going to SRI. Everyone knows that stuff. This is in Tel Aviv before any of that. And another story like this teleportation one, they're in the Sinai Desert. They're driving around in a Jeep, and they see a UFO. And Geller, all of a sudden, Puharich's book on Geller is fun to read, in and of itself, just because it's just like a cool, crazy sci-fi book, if anything.
Yeah.
Even though it's supposed to be, nonfiction. But he claims that this UFO lands, Geller goes into like a trance, boards the UFO, comes back with like a pen and said, or something like a pen, and basically said, these beings told me to keep this because this will forever be proof that I went on this craft. But the same thing, it's always like, oh, he's in a trance before this happens, apparently. And then it's that same idea of like, he believed it. And Puharich kind of substantiated, oh yeah, we saw it land and we saw you walk on it. And
what?
But then it always goes to that question, like, why? Again, you could just say, oh, well, they wanted to experiment with, can you get someone to believe in? We're just kind of framing it around this ET UFO thing. But it's always like, why do this? Why was he doing this?
Yeah.
I don't, because again, there's no concrete proof. Oh, Geller was a guinea pig. He was a subject. Like, I'm just kind of putting the pieces together, but it just seems to me that it's like, let's take this UFO ET framework and do these kind of mind manipulation experiments around that.
Investigations into MK Ultra begin. I have to go to you again, Walter, first, because this is right up your alley. Florida Congresswoman Ana Paulina Luna. Ana Paulina Luna. Ba, 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 ba. Anyway, she announced a congressional hearing on the CIA's Cold War era MK Ultra program. It was the secret operation that tested LSD on unwitting subjects. Tell me everything you know about this.
Well, one thing is that it supposedly ended in 1973, so why we're having hearings on it in 2026 is mysterious except maybe it didn't end. Now, MK Ultra was a program designed to create something like remote control assassins.
Yes.
Using drugs and subliminal messages and so on. And it was targeted at individuals. But honestly, what I think it really wanted to do was not just get people to assassinate others, but get millions of people to cheer on the assassinations. I think it moved into influencing the public mind, not just the individual mind. And I think that the reason that they're having these hearings now, which is a little mysterious, is that they're hinting that some of the violence you're seeing right now is not entirely organic. That's obviously what they're showing. I mean, why 50 years later? Yeah.
You guys see what we're up against here? Obviously, these guys on Fox News have no idea how to connect Ana Paulina Luna and her doing the MK Ultra hearings. She's also in charge of trying to disclose the files on the JFK assassination, and she's also in charge of the files on UFO disclosure. How can you not see now how all of this is interconnected? How it all actually ties back to Howard Hughes, the research done by Andrea Puharich, the remote viewing program at Stanford Research Institute with Hal Puthoff, and the development of directed energy systems to conduct mind control. That's why Ana Paulina Luna is in charge of UFO disclosure, the JFK assassination, and the MK Ultra hearings. All of this is intertwined, and it's all interconnected as the dark side of UFO disclosure. This is not just about UFOs, it's about the government's unethical research and practice and development of mind control abilities. The whole thing is such a mixed bag. And so that's why I said, like, when you get into UFOs on the surface, it feels like it's this really fun topic where you're just going to go out and do sky watching and camp out with your friends. But when you really dig into the history of it, the main key players involved, the people who show up on the Age of Disclosure, that work at Skinwalker Ranch, that go all the way back to the Stanford Research Institute, all the way back to Andrei Puharich, there's this Montauk Project, DARPA, MK Ultra element of weapons development underneath the surface of all of it. The reverse engineering aspect of it in order to weaponize it, to turn it into anti-gravity technology and craft, interdimensional craft, and building our own UFOs. And if aliens can transmit messages into human consciousness, why can't they do it with computers or technology and do like they controlled this bull, like Delgado would hook microchips into a bull and then could remote control it around. The whole thing is really spooky. I think it's the dark side of UFO research that everyone should be aware of before you get into researching UFOs. It's better that you know the devil that you're looking at and the potential darkness that you could be facing before you just stumble up to some of these research places and you go out and get involved and make friends with people in ufology, you have to realize that the whole thing is embedded with spooks. The whole thing is embedded with military contractors. The whole topic and people involved in it, you really don't know who they're working for and why they're there. So just be careful out there. Keep your intentions in alignment. Stay connected with the earth and the universe in positive ways. And we'll see you in the next one.